Give me one
Yeah,
sec.
just let me know when you're ready.
Oh, come on, don't do that to me.
Sarah, is the other side of your mask plaid?
No, it's red flowers. Should it be plaid?
Well, no, I think the other side of my mask looks like the outside of yours. That's borrowed.
You know, it's good to hear laughter in our room and in these buildings. Just want to say.
It's enough of that, Rick.
I thought you couldn't see over your mask.
Couldn't see to walk.
Reopen. Okay, I believe. You just check. Cassie? Just want to make sure. Is this the same one you have on your? We are ready.
Okay, are you ready? All right. All right, welcome to the School District of Prescott's Board of Education regular meeting. We were in executive session since 6:30 till 6:45. We are on item E, Pledge of Allegiance. Steve, would you care to lead us? Sure.
Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item F, recognition of visitors. Is there anybody in the audience that would care to be recognized? And there's, from live streaming, we're not allowing any. Kyle, is that right? Just, okay. Okay, we're gonna move on. Item G, good news from around the district.
Believe it or not, there is a lot of good news in the district, and I wanted to just kind of remind everybody that Prescott School District has never closed or stopped delivery of educational programs. Our investment in upper level classes and career and tech ed classes continued under some of the most dire circumstances and conditions one could imagine, with the COVID-19 hitting and having our students disperse back into the homes March 17th. But I would like to call Principal Figge forward. I want to thank both Mr. Figge, our AP teachers, and Michael Kozmowski, who had significant, and our tech department, to assist our students to be able to participate in advanced placement tests this spring in May. And we just received the results, and I would like Mr. Figge to present those.
Sure. It's good to be back. So as some of you guys might be aware, the College Board did hold AP testing this spring. They pivoted, like the rest of us did, very, very dramatically and changed up what the AP tests look like for just about every test this year. Most people, most educators believe that the test actually got harder because it was a completely written test this year. We actually increased the amount of students who took the test this year from last year. And I'm pleased to announce that last year we had hit our highest level ever of students scoring a 3 or higher on the AP test in terms of percentage, and that was 65%. And we mirrored that this year. And it's a pretty remarkable thing. If you think about us going off site in March, a lot of our AP teachers then had to teach a collegiate level course amidst off-campus learning and continue to engage kids and figure out how to, number one, deliver the content, but number two, completely change up how they were preparing kids for that test and for that content, to do it in a different way and oftentimes a more rigorous way. So this year we mirrored our highest ever level of achievement. We had 65% of our students this year who took the test score a 3 or higher on the AP test. At the same time, we again increased the number of students taking the test. And if you look at, and Mr. Kosmolsky was nice enough to crunch these numbers really quickly today, these scores came out this morning. Last year we earned 202 college credits for our students, or students earned those credits for themselves, I should say. This year it increased to 235 college credits earned through taking AP tests. So a lot of credit goes to our AP teachers who worked very, very hard, to our kids who continued to persevere throughout a lot of that uncertainty that was going on amidst that March, April, and early May for those AP tests, for their parents for continuing to support them. We did a session with parents, I believe it was kind of mid-April, about the new test and how they could prepare for those things. And we had something like 40, 45 families, both parents and students who logged in virtually and took in a lot of that information and then engaged with us to talk about what that test meant. So just a success all around, that even though we were off-site, we continue not only to hold the line, but actually increased our performance from years past. So thank you.
Thank you, Principal Figge, and congratulations both to the faculty that participated, and also well done by our students under, again, very trying times. At 5 o'clock, merely 2 hours ago, Clifton, Larson, and Allen left the district site. They've been auditing our fiscal year that ended on June 30th. So on July 13th through the 15th, Renee Peterson, Veronica Ford, and Liz Roberts with HR were completing the tasks. They've had very long days, a very short turnaround, and high pressure. What I can share with you is the anticipation was probably worse than the execution of these 3 days. The efficiencies, redundancies, and the checks and balances that we've put in place made these 3 days quite seamless, and I think a little bit more manageable. We owe a lot of gratitude to the continuing processes that they conducted during when we had our facilities closed and worked from afar, but also have been on site, as they've both have to pull files, and it includes an audit of our federal dollars, our state dollars, and local dollars. We should be receiving, the processes are a little bit longer because of the GASB 84 and some of the changes that went with Fund 60. I can share with you that we will have an end with a fund balance. At the last board meeting, we did say that we would, if had a fund balance overage, that we would commit up to $200,000 to Fund 46. That was executed and put into Fund 46 for future capital investments, and that'll be available to us in August 2022. So again, I just wanted to thank all of them, and I'm looking forward to the next mountain that team will climb. The last piece, I wanted to kind of just do an introduction for tonight. Tonight is our opportunity. As I mentioned, we never closed. And so our goal is to kind of bridge back, and what we're terming kind of our naming is return to learn. And we are starting with the premise, and we will begin with the premise that on August 31st, we'll have a welcome back for many of our students to re-socialize and orient themselves to the new realities that we'll experience. Our official start date for the school year will be September 1st. And we are going to be presenting our plans. Our plans are modeled and will always continue to be modeled around science and research that is peer-reviewed. We will follow 3 very specific agencies and organizations when we make decisions. And that is, we will always follow and base our decisions on the CDC guidelines and recommendations. We will look at Wisconsin Public Health. We will be partnering with A.Z. Snyder from Pierce County, who is the Director of Public Health here. and also in partnership with Cassie Butler, who is present tonight and has worked with all three of our departments from transportation, custodial, and food service, who are also going to be presenting later tonight, and has been part of every design team for our 4 facilities. I wanted to make sure that people understand that reopening and having our students and staff back in our building September 1st is not without risk. As you can see in the audience, we do have 100% of the individuals wearing masks. That will be something that will be shared with you, and how developmentally that will play out. From class lists will all include requests for families to have masks for our children. There are going to be times where they're recommended, and there will be times where they will be required. And we'll walk through that, and you will see that at elementary, because of the complex puzzle that Cassie Butler will share with you, it's trying to understand is that there are some recommendations when you're unable to meet that recommendation of social distancing or de-densifying the number of individuals in a certain location, and you'll hear more about that regarding transportation. It is very difficult for us to decrease the number of students from 70 bus riders to cut that in half. And so in order to do that, it would either be fiscally nearly impossible for us to do and risky for us to do with regards to the status of the Department of Revenue. So we will review 4 options for you tonight. So our goal here is not to set up debates about opinions. I realize that there are some highly charged and vocal individuals on both sides of almost every piece or discussion point that you'll hear in our plans. However, I'd kind of equate that to a loose thread on a sweater. The plans that you're going to hear tonight are in the best interest that we believe to try to minimize, not eliminate risk, but to minimize and control our response to an ongoing pandemic. We will be challenged by that both in the public and also in our personal lives. We also are going to be referring to loco parentis, and that is the legal obligation of a public education that we're obligated in a legal manner and legislated to act in the district's wide perspective over an individualized perspective. And so that we are following those principles across and acting in lieu of parents as we make these decisions.
Excuse me, point of order, where are we at the agenda?
I'm just talking about kind of the good news of having the plans approved and reviewed on July 13th with regards to what we're going to be sharing later today.
Okay, thank you.
So I just wanted to share that the plans and the writings that the staff have put together were submitted July 1st to Pierce County. Public Health, Cassie Butler and myself met for 2 hours with AZ Snyder. All of the plans and the risk assessment were reviewed. These plans were put together from June 5th through June 30th. You will see our guiding change documents and the participation of our staff. You'll learn more about how each site will be keeping some things and academic options available to all of our students, but also the safety precautions that are in place. It is not just returning to normal, but it's going to be our new reality, and that we will be looking at making adjustments when they're feasible and reasonable. We will continue to share out our executive plans after they're kind of reviewed tonight, and any feedback or tweaks that you may have or questions or concerns you'd like us to follow up. So as a district and administration team, I just wanted to let you as a board know, and also to our families and our greater community, that we're going to continue to follow peer-reviewed medical science. We will and are obligated to follow the public health guidelines if for isolation and for quarantine, as long as COVID is still active. It is not currently contained or controlled, and therefore, every step that we're taking is to try to reduce the possibility of contagion and to keep our programs open and our buildings open, and so that we'll continue to share that reputable information between now and September 1st. Thank you.
Okay. No other good news from the administration yet? So move on.
That's it. Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's get down to business. First item is consent agenda. We have minutes, board bills, personnel update, including the coaches. Is there anything that the board would like to pull out of consent?
No.
Okay, if nothing is to be pulled out, we will adopt the consent agenda. Are there any objections? Consent agenda is adopted. We'll move on to item 2, employment resignation. So we'll start with employment here.
The following employees are being recommended for the following roles. We have Mr. Jordan Hansen, a high school physical ed teacher, and Caden, is it Noshbush? Thank you. High school business teacher.
Any questions, anyone on this one?
I'd just kind of like to learn a little bit more about both of them, especially since we just essentially approved Jordan Hansen as the new football coach.
Right.
I'll call Mr. Smith, our activities director and assistant principal for the high school.
Thanks for having me. In terms of Mr. Hansen for Phi Ed and our head football, it was nice to marry those two positions as we posted them separately. So we posted for high school PE and we interviewed for that, and Jordan obviously interviewed for that. And we posted for head football too, and we screened and did some phone interviews for that. And then when Jordan was deemed our best fit for the PE position, we interviewed him for the head football position also, and it all came together with that for that. So he has experience teaching in Osceola. He was in high school there last year and coached football, and then he was at Holman Middle School for 3 years prior to that teaching, and 7 years total coaching football. So good fit. We had some good candidates. We felt ultimately that was our best decision there. And then Caden we interviewed virtually for a business ed position. Brought a lot of great personality and just kind of qualities we were looking for that position there.
Thank you.
Anything else, anyone? Questions on anything for Matt? Thanks, Matt. All right, can take a motion.
I'll move to improve the employment of Jordan Hansen, high school physical education teacher, and Caden Nosbush, high school business teacher.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. And I'm just following the business items. I know there's a numbering scheme in the board agenda, but it's all letters. So I'm just going to go with letter N. Second reading of Neola social media policy and updates to related policies.
Yes, this is, these three have been talked about for the last 18 months within the district. We are updating policy 7540 and 7540-02. Policy 7544 is brand new. Per comments from the board last week, we kind of went back through and cleaned up. As you know, these are ones that we edit and put in questions, and you have a lot of dial boxes. We went through and made sure that we struck through those and kind of eliminated that. I have not, as an administrator, nor have any of the principals, sent back any information about questions or concerns that we've received. So we'd like to move forward with these as adoption for the second reading.
Tanya, do you have any questions on any of these?
Nope.
Vicky?
No.
Steve?
No, sir.
Pat?
No questions.
Okay, great. We'll take a motion.
I'll move to approve the second reading of the above listed policies.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. We'll go to item O, consider approval of student academic standards annual requirement.
Yes, I'm going to have Principal Kozmowski, if he wouldn't mind coming forward. On an annual basis, school boards are required to list off the standards that they're following and implementing within their district. After this, it'll be published in and on our website. And so, Mr. Kozmowski, I've put up the curriculum standards for 2020-21 on the board.
Yep, and again, this is a yearly notification that we do to families, or what are the standards that we're using for these. These are the ones that are written out in statute, reading and writing, math, science, history, geography, and personal finance literacy. So every year we have to go through and notify families what is that before the beginning of the school year. Also, there's a full list of all of the different standards that we do use on the website, and there's a link to it there. It's also under the academics. For this year, there are no changes. Currently, we have several that are under review by our staff, including the art and physical education. Also, foreign language is under review as well. So those three are under review. We'll probably have a recommendation next year at this time for those. And then the state always is updating and refining standards. So new English language arts and reading standards were released in May. And mathematics standards are going to be released sometime this school year. But no changes from last year.
Steve, any questions?
No.
Pat?
No.
Tanya?
Quick question. You brought up the review cycle. When was history last reviewed, or is that on the docket now? I'm just wondering because of all kind of the current stuff within our society.
The Wisconsin State Standards for Social Studies, those were adopted last year by the
Last
school
year's.
board. They had been
Okay.
released the year prior. Prior to that, about 4 years, the C3 framework, which was a national framework, was released, and we had looked at those, and then the Wisconsin ones were modeled after that, but then additional Wisconsin standards were added to that and given context of Wisconsin history. So that was very recently that we did that. We're actually in year 3 of that review, so the state also has a 3-year rollout to our staff where we look at prioritizing those standards and how do they fit within our content. And we're probably about a year away from looking at new resources, especially at the 6-12 level for social studies.
And when you say resources, curriculum to
Yep,
use for instruction?
Yep, curriculum
Okay,
resources, yep.
great. Thank you.
Vicki, any questions?
No.
All right, thanks. Michael? Want to entertain a motion here?
All right. I move pursuant to section 120.12 13B of the state statutes to approve the list and description of the student academic standards that shall be in effect for the 2020-2021 school year, as said list has been presented on the Prescott School District website annual notice page with a date of July 15th, 2020 for this meeting, with said academic standards representing the board adopted standards that are required under section 11831GA of the state statutes, as well as the board-approved standards in the additional specified academic content areas. And I move to direct the administration to incorporate the board-approved list and description of the student academic standards that shall be in effect for the school year into a notice for parents and guardians that the administration shall provide in a manner that is consistent with the requirements of section 120.1213 of the state statutes.
I'll second. Nice job.
Nice job, Steve.
Good job, Steve.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. And we go from item O to item 5. Consider agreement with Baldwin Woodville for physical therapy.
Mr. Inouye with our student services.
Our lettering and numbering is not indicative of
Yeah.
the education ordered at Prescott.
A little rusty.
All right, this is just actually a review or a readoption of an agreement we've had over the past several years. Essentially, we partner with Baldwin Woodville, St. Croix Central, and Somerset in order to provide physical therapy to our students. This is essentially a renewal of an agreement we've had in the past several years. We are very happy with our physical therapist. She comes once a week, and it just is a nice way of us being able to partner with other districts for some of those services that are kind of low incidence, and we would not really be able to kind of hire an entire person on our own. So we would recommend that you would approve this agreement.
Vicki, any questions?
No.
Tanya?
No questions.
Pat?
No questions.
Steve?
So the organization that we've used in the past is no longer providing services, but the person who was doing it before.
Yeah, and that's actually been the last 2 years, I believe. So we used to
Okay.
go with St. Croix Therapy. They kind of closed shop. Baldwin Woodville then kind of became the fiscal agent, hired the person that we had used. So we've been able to continue with her. So we are very pleased with the individual that we use.
Sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Inouye.
I move to approve physical therapy service contract with Baldwin Woodville School District for the 2020-21 school year.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Move on to item 6, consider bus route adjustments due to COVID-19 balance between country and in-town busing.
So I'm going to have Mr. Runquist join me here in a minute. I just wanted to share with the board, this is probably one of the most challenging, obviously, adjustments that we will be putting forward. But it's important for the timeliness in that Tim is the one that drafts all of the routes and also has to then communicate those routes out to families and set up the times in Infinite Campus. One of the biggest challenges that we had as we reviewed all of our plans that we submitted to Public Health was that we're making many adaptations throughout the school day that you'll hear more about. But at this time, we didn't have the bus fleet to send more of our own buses out. We don't have it is very difficult or challenging to hire additional bus drivers. And we have looked at outsourcing as well. One of the challenges is that the more individuals are in a confined space and from across families or across grade levels, the likelihood of contamination or passing on of the COVID virus rises. And in order for us to try to mitigate that, we have looked at 4 different options, and I'm going to have Tim come forward. And then we also have a handout that's at each of your tables that is the City of Prescott. Couple things as we look through this is I'll have Mr. Runquist kind of talk through the 4 different options and share with you kind of the pros and cons that he looked at with regards to if we're going to try to reduce and de-densify the student counts on the buses. The recommendations have been to try to get to 50% of ridership. That was our kind of chokehold, if you will, from trying to resolve that. So Tim, do you want to kind of run through the 4 options, the pros and cons, and then what our recommendation for the board is at this time?
Okay, number 1 there would be just to maintain the bus routes as we've done it in the past years, not have much change at all. We'd probably have a little less ridership. It wouldn't impact much of anything, and it wouldn't really change our cost any. The bad con about this, it would not decrease the numbers of the students in each bus, so they would still be crowded. Our country buses are very crowded already. The number 2 would be eliminate non-mandated bus routes. Legally not required to transport students within a 2-mile radius of the school location. That would eliminate 2 buses in our bus fleet from in-town buses. We could move these 2 buses to the country and then reduce the number of students on the bus routes out there. That's a pro. Another pro that this would not delete our sub-driver pool, and the cost would not change much. It would be a little increase on mileage. The con to this would be some students and parents would need to arrange for their own means of getting to a school. Number 3 would be to outsource for 2 additional routes or hire 2 additional drivers and use our own buses from our sub-fleet. This would help to densify the country bus routes. That's a pro. A con would be major cost implications and depletes the sub-driver pool, and it also reduces the number of sub-buses in the fleet. Number 4 move from a single tier to a two-tiered busing system. A pro that would help densify the bus routes. A con, it would disrupt the instructional day for all the students, and it would double the current transportation cost.
And Tim, I've put at the desk of every board member, they have this ledger size description of the city. Could you, and it's up on the board for the audience, could you explain a couple of the nuances with regards to how far would walking be if we were to no longer provide transportation, as well as the hazardous areas that by definition they're preordained and that we would be required to still bus?
Okay, so the black lines going to the center of yellow square in the center, that would be, the yellow square is the middle, or intermediate school, Malone Intermediate School. The longest line from the bottom up is out at the corner of Highway 35 and Wakota. It's right at the top of the hill coming into town on 35. Walking distance, your shortest path is 1 mile. As you keep going to your left, the next black line, the walking is the same distance, 1 mile. And then all the way around to the top, well, no, that's 0.8 of a mile, and then the next one up there, I believe, is 0.7 of a mile. That's to the Malone Intermediate School. The two green lines, one is from the corner of the baseball fields up by the new high school here. To walk to the middle school would be 1 mile. The line above that is coming from Shane Park Circle, is where all the apartments are up on the hill. That's also a 1 mile walk to the middle school.
Tim, that says a crow flies,
No,
or is it like as they walk the
that's a
street?
walking path, so the line just is to indicate the locations where you start from.
Okay.
Why does the high school not have a radius piece there like the other schools?
Generally, what I put on this map was for the kids in the intermediate school and for middle school. In between, a shorter distance for all of them would be Malone. The longest distance to get to the high school is 1.7 miles.
Okay.
That would be on the very bottom of your map, where it says 1 mile down there.
Mm-hmm.
From there to get to the high school is 1.7 miles. So it's all within the 2 mile radius of the school. And inside of the Highway 10-35 corridor, we have very, very few high school students that do use the buses.
Any questions from the board here, Steve?
Yeah, I've got a number of questions, but, I mean, Tim, like the neighborhood up on the hill here where Mike lives, how does that play into a pathway? Because I don't know.
That's mandated busing.
Okay, that is,
That and any road that goes out to the cemetery,
okay,
mandated. Any road, anything on the outside of Highway 10-35
is
is
mandated.
a hazardous zone
Yeah,
determined by the school district many years ago.
yeah, I remember, we've had a number of conversations about this.
Correct.
Oh,
So
we-
inside that area is the area that legally the school does not have to provide transportation.
I mean, this is a tough conversation. This is a unique year for me because I'm in a situation where neither one of my kids are gonna have to ride the bus very often, but relative to the rest of the community, I think the busing survey shows a little weight to this. I'd like some more information, but, you know, on a day like today, walking a mile and a half to school is no problem. January 14th, it's a different story in my book, so I kind of, you know, I don't know what else was looked at, if a half-mile radius was looked at to make a difference. You know, I know you start to lose your cost savings and that sort of thing, but that's one thing I was wondering. You know, and I know we've talked about reductions in previous years due to budget constraints and that sort of thing. So this isn't the first time we've had this conversation. I think many of the parental concerns are probably still going to be in place, whether it be weather, lack of sidewalks, safety of kids just in general, walking down the street. I certainly think those are legitimate concerns. It might be a small percentage of people with those concerns. I guess I don't know. I don't have that data, but I'd be curious to have a little more information. But I'm also interested to see what everyone else has to say about this subject, because it's kind of a big deal.
Pat?
So Tim, on the corridor of 10 and 35, and just so that, I mean, just for example, so what we're saying that if we have a family that lives on Lake Street, they are provided busing because that is so. So it's literally to the nth degree when it comes to that. So Broad Street, Jefferson, it's an extension of the 35 Highway 10 loop. And if you're outside of that, you will be provided busing underneath this plan.
Yes, the school,
Okay.
yes, the school district has a plan, it's
Yep.
a written plan.
Mm-hmm.
If they have to cross that road, then the highways, the
Yep.
state highways, they are in a hazard area.
Okay. My next question is, I think, so 2 miles is the law, but all of our discussions have been based around 1 mile. So to Tim's point, we do have some potential residents that are over a mile away from the high school. And if we were to have a high schooler wish to take a bus to the high school, are we developing, I mean, so I guess I'm looking for clarity. Are we saying a mile or are we saying 2 miles?
We're saying in town.
What's our, we're just saying in town, period.
Yep, and it
Okay,
looks like
thank you.
1.7 is the farthest.
Okay. I think that clarification actually answers my next couple of questions, so, I'm good. Thank you.
Tanya?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to comment that this does impact my kids. So, my kids would take busing typically, they live in town. One of my kids will be at the high school, she'll be walking over a mile from where she is, and another one's will be going to the middle school. And I've had conversations with my kids, and they don't want to walk to school, but I fully accept that there's some sacrifices my family will have to make so we can open up the doors for our kids safely and have a better chance of mitigating some of the risk on those buses. And I've been on those buses, we've seen those buses, they're very crowded, in some cases I would comment maybe even overcrowded. And so I completely understand that as a parent I might have to do something a little different or come up with a carpool plan for my kids, even in the winter. I also wanted to comment that I know it's a hardship for some families. I have never worked or lived in a district that hasn't had some kind of walking radius. So this isn't unheard of that we have kids walking to school. And I think, unfortunately, I know that it is a hardship for some of our families, and I see the data here. It looks like roughly about 10% of our families that filled that out said that it would be somewhat of a hardship for them, if I'm reading that correctly.
Correct.
And I appreciate that. I mean, I understand that that will be hard. But I do think that if our goal is to have kids come to school as consistently as possible without having to do things like quarantining large groups of kids or making sure that kids can come consistently to school and not spread the virus, whatever's that might look like, I think that limiting the amount of kids on a bus is really important to do. And so I had some questions just about, in general, how does this help us out? I know it frees up 2 buses, which is maybe potentially even 4 routes, I would assume, if you're kind of dropping off in some of these smaller areas and then country. But how does that actually impact our numbers on the bus? Is it worth it for that hardship or not?
That's a great question. And Tim, what I would suggest is if you could go through what a current country bus kind of ridership is, and then by adding these 2 additional bus routes out there, what it does to the ridership. But also, all of you know there's a carousel that happens within our school system, and all of the buses currently go to Malone Intermediate, and then we shift all these kids. So it's like a 52 card pickup. Would you speak first to the ridership, but also what it eliminates with regards to the carousel?
Okay, with the ridership, if we were to add 2 buses out into the country routes. All 9 routes that are already there would be affected. I would be making adjustments to every route on the way that we are picking up kids and how many kids are on the bus. With statistics from last year and going with averages, I'm going to estimate that we would have about 30 kids, give or take a few, either way on the buses,
With this change, 30
on the
kids.
country buses.
And
Correct.
How
with the
many
tra-
did we have last year around on a bus?
It would vary anywhere from 35 to 65.
Right, okay. So in some cases, we were able to reduce it in half.
Right, so, and we're getting some statistics, we're getting some information from parents that their kids aren't gonna be using the bus, stuff like that. Like privately, emails, stuff like that. So just by tracking the kids in the country that did ride last year, by their age, the ones that are gonna get their license, going by statistics, and it doesn't change much from year to year. I'm looking at that should be a close number if we were to put 11 buses out in the country.
And then can you speak to that carousel part? Because I also, what I recall from conversations in the past is some kids get off, some additional kids get on, and if we're trying to limit exposure as one of our goals, that's a huge increase of exposure. So would we be able to limit some of that carousel kind of situation?
We would like to eliminate it completely.
Perfect.
That's what Cassie told me anyway. So that is a plan that I've been working on, putting pieces together. If we end up with making this plan where we,
Yeah.
either way, I guess whatever, we're trying really hard to come up with a way that the kids on the buses are gonna be the kids that go home, come to school and go home on that bus. No other
Together.
kids, no transferring. We have one small glitch in that situation with some 4K kids coming from the 2 centers, which I got a plan for.
Okay.
But
But essentially, it's, and we'll talk about this, I know, later when we talk about reopening plans, but it goes back to that cohort model, which is one of the recommendations that I believe the CDC has out there, the county health board has out there, and I can't remember the third one that we're using as guidance.
Public health.
Public
Wisconsin
health.
Public Health.
So it really kind of goes with, you're with the same kids on the bus, and you're getting off with the same kids on the bus, and I would assume visitors and all that stuff, so the visitor policies and stuff would apply to there too. And then I did just want to, because we are using 3 guiding agencies to help us make these decisions, I just wanted to check, what is the CDC recommendation per busing, or the county health board, the public health, what is their recommendation?
So I'll have Cassie kind of join us on this. I did want to also mention, because Tim just talked a little bit about 4K transportation. I have reached out, Sarah Dusick and Cassie are meeting with our 4K centers next week. Under this plan, our commitment to still providing transportation to the child care centers, all of them, and our 4K transfer would still occur. So.
And how about St. Joe's, since we're
Yes,
talking to?
yeah,
Okay.
so they're included, so no change within day and end of day. So this change allows our stagger drop-off and pickup. It would eliminate the carousel, and then, could you help just define, because you basically
Yeah.
used the word cohort, what the cohort term means and how, because it's going to come up multiple times throughout tonight.
Yeah, so the cohort is just trying to keep groups of students together, trying to keep those groups smaller. And then, the more we can keep them together, the more mitigation we can do. So for busing, the carousel was a huge one, because we've implemented assigned seatings on the buses so that we can track who's sitting next to who. We're gonna keep family groups together on the buses. So we're not only reducing, I'm sitting next to my best friend versus I'm sitting next to my family member that I'm around all the time. And then with that, the CDC and public health have come out with different models for options to use, and with 100% of the busing, so looking at busing staying the way it is right now, we couldn't de-densify and we couldn't use any of that spacing. So we weren't really changing anything. So with decreasing the busing capacity or ridership to like 50% of what it has been in the country, we're able to then look at more spacing and things like that.
And so I've read the guidelines and stuff, and I believe it was one child for like every seat or even every other seat, depending on what and when you read. And so this is just a step getting closer and closer to
Yep.
being able to follow all 3 sets of guidelines.
Correct.
We're not
And-
quite there, but
Yeah.
we're getting there.
Yep, but moving,
Yep.
you know, the de-densifying is the biggest thing.
But having 65 kids on the bus doesn't do anything to help us
No.
mitigate that situation.
No.
So I guess my one other question, was, and I don't even know how the country, the state, the county evaluates when we're kind of out of that risk area of all of this pandemic, but at some point is our intention to hopefully bring busing back to in-city. This isn't a permanent thing. This is something that we're doing in response to a crisis situation.
Really well said. Exactly. This is in response to an emergency situation. So it's extraordinary and requires extraordinary response. If and when a vaccine is in place and known that it's effective, later today, Cassie will walk us through the actual statistics and where we can find kind of the incident rates. We would then shift back when we felt it was comfortable and healthy to do so.
Okay, great. Those
So,
are my
so your
questions.
intent would be to go back to normal city busing and,
That would be our
That's cool.
intent.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. It's mostly, and that's a really good communication piece, is that this is in response to COVID. If and when it's contained, we would believe that we would then revert back to providing the services as they had been.
Perfect, thank you.
Vicki?
So if the country buses had anywhere from 35 up to 65 students on it, what did the in-town bus routes carry as far as kids on a regular basis?
The in-town buses, the first route, they did 2 routes every day, morning and afternoon. And in the morning, they picked up K through 12 in a certain area and went to all the schools to deliver 2 different times. In the afternoon, we went to the intermediate school and the Malone Elementary School, that's where the majority of your kids are, and that was your first route in the afternoon. Them routes generally would have anywhere from 50 to 60 kids, some bus routes even more, because the majority of your kids were elementary that ride, whether you're country or city.
Yep. So, I mean, we couldn't even meet any of these guidelines with in-town busing the way it stands now. So, then I guess my other question is, so the families that responded that they do have a known hardship, is there some sort of resource, some sort of help that we can give them, something that we can, line up if they need to contact a neighbor or someone for carpooling? Or is there, I don't know, if, I just don't want to leave them kind of in the lurch with this. If they've got little kids, is there someone that's got an older student that would be walking that we could put them in touch with, that then they could walk these younger kids to school with?
It might be a really good idea for like our parent committees to kind of see if they can come up with some kind of calling tree or people that are willing to give carpool rides or something. I can see that being a really useful thing to do. Yeah.
Certainly.
The other thing too is we have the YMCA, and I believe the plan is that would be back in school when school is in session, right? The before and after school care. And so, families can, there's extended time that kids can come to school. It doesn't have to be, if it was on the bus, or drop off, there's only certain times you can drop them off. But we do have the YMCA, and there might be some way that we can kind of work with some of that as well.
Correct.
Do we get kids, so I think the intermediate school is the hub for the YMCA. So is there transportation from there every morning to the various schools?
Yes.
Okay, and would the potential plan to be to continue that? To Tanya's point, if more people take advantage of it, okay.
I mean, they could walk there too. I mean, it's right, it's
Yeah.
probably the elementary school they're
Well,
mainly.
yeah,
going to.
except that potentially
We-
defeats
we-
the purpose of
Yeah.
using the service
Yeah.
if you're worried about
Yeah.
something, yeah.
No, I mean, like, because I'm thinking some of the parents might need to drop off at 7 in the morning versus the start
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So they can get to work and the kids aren't alone. But they could walk with adult supervision. I mean, it's 1 block away.
Sure.
If we had to do that.
Get some of those volunteers from,
Mm-hmm.
you know, some of our retired folks in town, and who knows what we
Sure.
could cooperate with there. I had a couple of other questions. I'm curious about other districts. I know we've talked about this in years past, and I'm not necessarily speaking to response to COVID, but just in general, districts near us, you know, who's walking in town and who's busing in town? If anyone has that data.
I mean, the question is, does Hudson have walkers and Ellsworth, or do they have 100% transportation? Is that kind of question?
That is the
too?
question, yes, thank you.
I don't know.
Do
Tim,
you
do you
know?
know that off the top of your head?
Did you write it on your hand?
We can,
From what I know about Ellsworth, they have large pickup locations when buses are coming into town. So they have buses set up that coming into town with a half a bus route, and they'll stop at a stop, probably pick up 15 kids. Them kids probably walk anywhere from a mile, or half a mile to 3/4 of a mile. I'm not sure about that. But so they have hubs that buses stop at, and I think River Falls does some of the same. I'm not sure if they have specific town routes like we do. Half mile from school, River Falls, no busing.
Okay, well, I mean, that's just good for perspective for me. This document also notes some consideration to, relative to cost, charging, say, 50%. I'm assuming that would be a charge to families in this scope?
so currently, we do not get any reimbursement on bus aid for anybody within town. Currently, we still provide it. That would be one option if we were trying to figure out a way to cover additional budgetary expenses of hiring 2 additional drivers or to outsource. I think in our consideration, we weren't sure that that was a most viable option of the 4 that were there.
I'm not saying it is either, I just wanted clarification on what that meant, because, you know, ultimately, we're subsidized for out-of-town busing, correct? And we are
Just
not-
for out of town,
And we are
correct?
not subsidized for in-town busing.
Correct.
So,
And any hazardous, right? So any,
They had, right.
we're subsidized for all
Yeah.
that.
yeah, just, I think that's an important point to understand in this big picture, so.
Yeah.
Any more questions from the board? So
I-
it sound, go ahead,
I
Pat.
do, Mike, and we might not know this yet too, but what are the possibilities, so we get down the road, we get a couple months into school, and we start seeing trends with numbers, or they're not quite what they thought, or there's more, whatever, is there an opportunity to revisit this as we go and keep this somewhat fluid?
I think those are the words of the day. I mean, we're going to have to refine. Basically, I would, and I've worked with all the principals, these are the plans we're going to start with. And that based on the information, both as we experienced last year, we had to pivot on a dime. We will have kind of our base package and then an alternative 1, 2, and 3. I think we need to start somewhere. I know this is a very difficult and personal decision for some of you. I think our recommendation, as Tim and I have sat down, trying to balance the greater needs of all students and trying to meet some of the health guidelines that are already taking place in each of our buildings, that option 2 of eliminating the non-mandated routes was the most straightforward. It doesn't eliminate any of our employees. It's not a cost savings. Actually, it'll be a little bit more expensive for us because the buses that historically were only in town are now going further. The drivers are paid by the mile, so the cost for that does go up. So again, this is an added cost financially, but I think it's a value added in trying to reduce the contagion as best we can.
I don't think the cost will be a big change because we are eliminating the miles in town. So the plan I have is that it's not a real long bus routes that would be created, but it would be a few more miles.
Well, so your recommendation is number 2.
Yeah.
And so I will tell you that number 4 looks like a really not a great plan. It seems like it'd be a nightmare for educators and students alike, even without seeing all the details, in my opinion.
Agreed.
I think the health and safety of our students is probably foremost here, as well as our staff, of course, and it's a difficult thing. Not everyone's on the same page as far as how they feel about COVID-19 relative to if it's real or if it's really contagious or if they're going to be able to, if they're going to get really sick from it. But in my opinion, we really have to err on the side of caution, I think, and be wary of that. And, wearing a mask is not mandated. I don't necessarily have to sit up here and wear it, and I'm not wearing it for my health. I'm wearing it for everyone else, because if I'm a carrier and I don't know it, so, I think that we just have to be wary of that. And quite honestly, option 2, while it's not the best for everyone in town, I think it may be the best for the district at this time. But I just want to make, Pat had a great point of us being able to adjust in 2 months if we need to. And I want to make sure that once we get through this, because I'm sure we will, that we can go back to bringing those kids into school on buses and alleviating some of those hardships, because everybody's feeling it. And these are tough decisions, and, we're here to make them, but, I think we all have the right mindset in trying to make this decision. The information that Tim has brought forward is very good. I know Dr. Scusa worked on this as well, so.
Question just about how this works out. If we were to make a motion and the motion was to eliminate non-mandated routes, should we add something in there that specifies that this is just temporarily during this pandemic period, or else we're gonna have to come back and have these conversations again, and that's a month out at times, and that, I don't want kids to have to walk a month in winter if we don't need to.
Could we give the flexibility for the administration to make a change as needed if the numbers pan out and we can add, well, I think we're all on the same page here. We don't want to cut in-town busing, but it's the right thing to do during this time.
My only caution about that would be the board is making a decision to do this. I think the board needs to make a decision to not do it.
Okay.
I think that needs to be clear from a governance standpoint.
To add the routes back, is what you're saying?
So we might
Yeah,
have to-
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
to
Well, I'm
revisit.
open, I mean, if numbers are changing and administration recommends that we think we can bring this bus routes back, I mean, we can have a special meeting and bring that back sooner than waiting that month.
I mean,
And think
imagine the
that's what-
conversation 12 months from now.
Yeah.
And everyone has a vaccine, but yet parents are still concerned, or the district's still concerned, or students are still concerned. Maybe we have to wait a
Sure.
little longer before we change the buses back. That type of conversation may have to be held down the road.
And I think because this town has, we haven't had walk-in routes in the past. It is something to think of from a superintendent lens of, if this carries into winter, what that means for days off of school, snow days and stuff. It's a lot more dangerous for our kids to be walking to school 2 miles in that cold weather than on the bus and stuff. So, I think we also have to be flexible with, the way we've done business in the past in regards to safely getting kids to school might also have to change a little bit.
You touch on a really good point, too. And Tim, it seems like we did this before, but if we do this in-city walking, are we going to be able to lay out routes that we consider to be the safest so that families can say, hey, I need to get my kid to this street and then go down this corner and then hang it right here? Oops.
I have not done that, but we certainly could work on it, yeah.
It seems like a decent consideration so we can hit what sidewalks we do have. We can keep, I don't know what the safest routes are walking in town, but, lighting in the winter could be important in the evenings, those types of things, so.
Well, and this
Coordinate with
way,
plowing and the police.
Yeah.
the
and-
city,
and all
get the
that,
city
yeah.
involved in this. These are their streets. They need to plow the streets, we need the kids to walk on. They need to watch traffic on the streets, we need the kids to walk on. if we get them involved in this, I mean, that helps us out, and I think helps families out.
Yeah, I mean, we could ask for some additional coverage during those high traffic times from,
Yeah.
police department,
Beginning-
whoever.
Yeah, beginning
So
of school and
Can
end
we
of school.
task you with kind of digging into that, Rick? And you and
Absolutely.
Tim?
That'd be great, yeah. Excellent idea.
I don't wanna, make this go any longer. Tanya said something really important though, that I think is if we're still walking come winter, what may have traditionally not been a snow day or a cold day may also have to be reconsidered. And maybe that even plays into what we're all gonna talk about in terms of distant learning, or
Exactly.
maybe
And-
there's some opportunity there, so not to jump on that.
Yeah,
but-
so, and I'll just kind of preface it by saying, our goal last year was to put in place distance learning specifically to allow us to not have to take a snow day, that we could do that from home. COVID forced us to do that. And you're going to hear a little bit more about, we didn't have a lot of time to ramp up. We know that we have to do better in the fall for some off-campus learning, so we'll talk a little bit about those changes. But to your point, we will be able to meet attendance requirements and instructional minutes for anybody that is not on site throughout any day because of health conditions for themselves, the family. So we know about 80 to 81% right now are confident that they're coming back based on the information they have today. And if nothing changes, another 16% are unsure. For those 16, we're going to do everything to communicate out these plans. I think as we make these decisions, people will vote with their feet, and then we'll continue to respond in ways to make sure that they continue to get a free, appropriate public education.
We good here? Anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, so a couple of these things, yeah, I would like to get, if we can come up with, some specific kind of walking routes so that we can ask the city to help, the police to help monitor at specific, the to and from school times. If parent groups can come up with some sort of calling tree, if there's parents who need it, and the parents who have the hardship, if they don't know about the Y programs, let them know about them, that this is an option for you. If you can drop your kids off early or whatever you need to do, we have this available for them. Because if they've never used it in the past, they may need to use it now. So I just want to make sure that we get that stuff out to parents and ask to the city.
Thank you.
Yeah, well
Noted.
said.
Yep.
Yeah, great discussion, guys. So I think if we're ready to make a motion, we can do that now.
I move to eliminate non-mandated bus routes.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, everyone. It's a tough discussion.
Yeah. Tim and Cassie, thank you very much for the work that you put into that as well.
All right, we'll move on to information discussion. First item is school perceptions timeline.
Mike, just a point of order on that last motion. I think we should have had an opportunity to have more discussion after the second. I won't press the issue now, but probably I would have offered some sort of amendment relative to the reason for the change for the busing. But just as an FYI, I think we should have
Yeah.
had some discussion after the second.
Okay.
We're now into information discussion. I've put forward to you the kind of timelines. We had selected to move forward with school perceptions to implement a paper survey that will be mailed to 100% of households within the Prescott district. We partnered with Tim Runquist and the county to have a digital graphic interface with regards to what our district boundaries are. School Perceptions has a database with the United States Postal Service. They integrate those and will eliminate any businesses. And so it helps to ensure that we get 100% of the households that are there. The kickoff meeting occurred with myself and Andrea for communication. Our goal is to have next month a draft of the survey so that you can see the questions, how they would be put forward. Remember, it's a two-part kind of survey, one to deal with the facility study that was presented to you in August and the costs associated with that, and then the second piece with regards to adding safe, controlled, secure entranceways to our intermediate and elementary building. Mike Hoyka and myself are meeting with SDS Architects tomorrow. We're going to go through their facility study and red line off all of the work that Mike and his team has done to our facilities since that study was completed. There were some big ticket things, as you recall, that happened last summer with regards to tuck pointing. We also have set up the middle school with some additional modifications with regards to dehumidification and airflow that was pretty pricey. We mitigated a lot of the water infiltration in the alleyway. New concrete curbs were poured, and I believe at the end of the month, Mike, was that alley going to be paved as well? So we're taking care of the drainage that was interfering with some of the lower facilities at the middle school. Our goal is for the board to kind of see the integration both of the questions, the tax impact, and then to also see the designs or preliminary designs that SDS would have that would be presented to the community. The goal for School Perceptions is to have finalized after the September board meeting and the annual meeting the series of questions and how they're framed, to be able to send that out in the mail to everybody. Those surveys are available to be answered on paper and mailed back, or they can be answered online. So it's either way, it can be taken care of. They follow kind of a 3-week window so that they can capture multiple weekends, and then that information would be summarized and presented back to the board for 2 sessions, regular board meetings, unless you would like to have a work session. So it gives you 2 months to kind of look at what the community is responding, what the tax impact would be, and we're working with Baird Finances to be able to look at that as well. If you decide to move forward based on the information back from the community, our deadline for an April 2021 request to the community to support both the new roofs and infrastructure and the secure entranceways would have to be passed no later than the January board meeting for an election in April. So you can kind of see up there with regards to kind of the timeline that's been put in place. It is one of those things that we will come back to you in August. It would, I believe, be a really nice fit with our annual meeting. We haven't been able to have open meetings in a long time. We plan to have our annual meeting to be open. It would allow our architects, Baird, and School Perceptions to be all available either by Zoom or in person, so that we could present that information at our annual meeting, as well as giving the preliminary budget for the 2020-2021 school year. At this time, I'm going to ask that we kind of consider it's the trade-off of, in order for us to build a budget that has to be adopted in October, and we just finished the fiscal year audit at 5 o'clock tonight, that we given everything that we're doing, the soonest I think we could have the annual meeting is in September. That's been traditional for us. I think we would like to suggest that it be done during the September 16th. Okay. I could have used that on the last, what is the answer? September 16th is a regular board meeting. I would like us to kind of consider making that the annual meeting and moving the board meeting back 1 week to the 23rd. I think trying to have the budget from our finance director, Renee, in sooner than the 16th is almost impossible. To go beyond that would really push getting the information back that I think you'll need to make an informed decision about moving forward. So that's kind of how it plays out. Once it's all set, and if we do have a resolution or the amount, then we kind of wait until we get closer to the election date that's set at April 6th. Again, that would be pending a decision in January. Any questions or feedback?
Just before I open it up, so the 16th is our regular school board meeting. You're proposing that we would move the regular board meeting back to the 23rd
Correct.
and have the annual on the 16th potentially here instead?
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure I got that. Yeah, we can open it up. Tanya, do you want to, you got any questions or comments on this?
No, I've been looking forward to getting the survey started for a while. I'm really curious to see where the community's at in regards to this and tax tolerance and all that kind of stuff right now, so, nope.
Vicky?
No, I'm just really interested to see, yeah, how they phrase it, what they come up with, and see where we're at. So, yeah, if we need to move, I would like time to actually kind of look through some stuff, so, yeah, if we have to move it back, I'd much rather we move our board meeting to give us that time.
Right. Pat?
Yeah, I'm not advocating for additional meetings, but I guess I would be concerned about reviewing and approving a final draft of this during an annual meeting without potentially have, so what I would like to see is maybe a workshop prior to. I don't know that everything can get accomplished there in one night very effectively. That's a lot.
To be clear, the 16th would be our annual meeting, wouldn't be approval at that time then?
Can just be
Of the final?
informational.
It would be informational. We would-
Understand,
yeah.
I personally think a workshop should be considered in there anyway, to give
In
that the-
addition to.
Yes, to give that the
Absolutely.
due
Got it.
diligence that it will require during the annual meeting, I think might be a lot to ask. So that was one comment. There's a 2-week lag between, September 28th, which is the survey to print and proof approved, and then when it hits the mailboxes. I guess I can guess that that's maybe production time, but it's just curious that there's a 2-week window there. I think the sooner this gets out in people's hands, the better. So maybe we could find out what that 2 weeks is all about.
Yeah, and we have a conference call with them tomorrow, so I
Okay.
can ask that.
And then, this schedule's great. I'm wondering, is there any reason not to start communicating this process earlier rather than October 1st?
And that's a great question. In talking with them, I think, and what we're going to talk about next is 2 different big topics that I think are going to consume a lot of oxygen in every room. And that is returning to school. Between August and September 1, a lot of our communication is going to be about the new protocols, practices, and procedures that are going to be in place. And that's going to take a lot of repetition and a lot of bandwidth, both for our families and for our students. In addition, there's a national election in November. And to be able to cut through all of that, it was their recommendation to kind of be cautious about not having our message get lost in either of those kind of channels with regards to reopening under kind of return to learn and also some of the political stuff that'll be coming for November.
Sure, and I guess my just counter to that is given the fact when this hits mailboxes, we want responses back within, not even, within 2 weeks. Then we have a national election, then we have holidays, and all of a sudden we're rolling into making decisions on addendums, or, potential, referendums. It just feels tight. I would like to see a little more notice, but I understand the thinking.
Anything else, Pat?
No, not right now.
Steve?
Yeah, Pat makes some good points. Just curious, when it says survey hits mailboxes, is that outgoing, or is that when people are supposed to receive it?
I'll have to clarify.
I don't know how quick the Prescott mail is, if it's got, seriously, I don't know if it has to go through St. Paul and come back, or, I don't know how any of that works, so I don't know how long it takes, but I do appreciate the schedule, Dr. Scusa. This really helps to give us some
That's great.
vision to kind of how this could come together. Just keep in mind, this is not the school board saying that we are definitely going to go to referendum for something. This is a timeline of opportunity to discuss it and determine what, if anything, we can or want to do. I understand the communication about school and everything else that's going on, but I got to agree with Pat. Even if you sent something out on September 1st saying, start looking at October 1st for more details,
Oh, sure.
and then we're going to send, just so it's available for people to know that it's coming, because we certainly want to get a good response. and
Or
want
is it
people to-
something we can
you
put
know.
on our website or something, just letting them know? I'm thinking like, I remember being an educator during all of this stuff at the end of last school year, and I remember being a parent, and there was so much email, it was overwhelming, and I apologize to all the educators here, but I probably missed half of it because it was so much stuff. I mean, I'm just being honest, and I think like all of our parents were in that same boat. It was overwhelming, which was, and I just don't want to overwhelm the families that are coming back and navigating a whole new way of learning and how, I know it's not completely new, but buildings are going to look really different, and there's going to be a lot of stuff going out. So I don't want to overwhelm either and have important messages missed.
No, that's a good point, but I'm thinking more community members who are not parents and won't get anything
Sure.
from the school, There's a lot of those folks out there that are gonna wanna have some input into this, and I wanna make sure that we let them know it's coming at least.
Yeah.
So maybe a teaser, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think Andrea is going to help kind of champion this for us and then partner with School Perceptions. I think a couple things that you've all pointed out is that we do have our community newsletter that goes out in August. We definitely will have space on that that'll forewarn. Obviously, we have the Pierce County Herald, our Journal, sorry.
I wouldn't use the terminology forewarn.
Used to be Prescott Journal, now you got a Pierce County. But I know that he's taking notes of this meeting. Obviously, we push that out. We will be working with our parent groups and families, so we'll make sure that we hit that. And then tomorrow, I can work with School Perceptions and Andrea to kind of learn a little bit more about maybe tactics and spaces that we could engage within the community. So using some of our businesses to post things and to make that aware, and obviously using our website. So well noted, and I'll take back some of the questions and concerns and just make sure that it's not going to, but the October mailbox won't be the first time and only time that they've heard it.
Thank you.
All right. So the way I look at this, as soon as that survey is ready for viewing for us to kind of critique, we need to be looking at it. So whether I think a workshop makes sense right away, as soon as we can get one in, a work session. Because if it's in a position where we're just like, this isn't at all what we expected, and we need more work, or we feel like it's not there, it'd be nice to leave enough leeway time to have another work session if it's needed. Because the timeline is really tight here. It's already mid-July. So if the survey needs to be finalized for print by September 28th, it's less than 2 months. So I would say let's get a work session as early as we can. Hopefully everybody can make it, and we're gonna have to roll forward with it, one way or the other, but we gotta have a work session as early as we can, and then take that feedback, they make a couple more cuts at it, maybe we can get it hammered out over online, but another additional work session might be needed, so I would plan on at least one, with the potential of having another one if we need it.
And obviously, I'll know more after the conference calls tomorrow. So we have one with school perceptions, one with the architects, kind of bookends for my day. I would be looking at somewhere between the August and September timeframe where a work session likely will be required. And I'll work with Beth to kind of identify maybe some dates that we would hold, just so that.
So would that be with school perceptions here?
They would, it's your, however you would like. They're willing to be on site with you or through Zoom or provide you the information, but they are very flexible and willing to be on site.
I think we should anticipate on site. It's just more collaborative that way if they're
Yeah.
here on site.
Sure.
And I know that might limit the amount of availability for days, so we'll have to work around that, but hopefully they can accommodate us. And I agree with both your two guys' points on, we need to make sure that we're doing whatever we can to kind of grease the wheels here to let people know this is coming, so we can get a good turnout. I think this town in general has been very interested in school district activities and the state of our school district, so I think we will get a good response rate if they know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Great. It looks great. This is a great timeline.
Yeah,
It kind of just, it's a nice outline for us to kind of, if, it's almost like a hurry up and wait type of, we got all this legwork to do to get to this point, and then we gotta wait till April before, if we go down that road. We'll see. So, all right. That covers that business item. We're going to move on to item 2, Return to Learn Task Force.
All right, so kind of frame this, moving from crisis to calm, but with urgency. Put all that in and stir it up and see what happens. Tonight, I just wanted to share that the amount of work from June 5th through June 30th was monumental. It's the planning, the amount of forms, the risk assessment tools submitted to Pierce County, the additional work that each site has done has been nothing short of remarkable and miraculous, especially after how hard our teachers work to sustain and bringing the 2019-2020 school year to the shores. Tonight, we're not going to go through all of the granular detail and supporting documents, but obviously it's available. Our goal is to try to hit, probably at a 30 to 40,000 foot level, our executive summary of the decisions that we have had to make. They are not perfect solutions, and I think Cassie will kind of reiterate this, but for every decision we make or everything that we can do, first and foremost, similar to kind of the front entrances of the schools, is it's about the safety and security of our students and our staff. For every decision that we made, we were trying to ensure that we understood we couldn't eliminate all risk, but when we could, we would make adaptations to be more in kind with the recommendations from the CDC, Wisconsin Public Health, Pierce County, and then obviously Cassie's expertise as a registered nurse. What I'd like for you to understand is that we did follow kind of the guiding change document that we've used for many of our decisions. Obviously, the well-being is also important for our students, and we believe that the most effective educational model is to have students in our facilities with our teachers under the best conditions possible. I am impressed and have great admiration for what our teachers endured and what our families endured last spring. But we also know that despite some of the great results from our AP exams, that we have some gaps that likely occurred by students not having consistent ongoing feedback all the way through with in-person for motivation and things like that. We've shared some articles with you and also with our community, and you'll learn a little bit more from Cassie as she walks through kind of our website. We have had monthly newsletters and will continue to ramp up the findings and shared understandings from tonight's meeting beginning next week, July 20th, and those will go out on a weekly basis between now and the start of school. Understand that the public health has categorized both academic and WIA and community activities as low, moderate, or high-risk activities. So we, every time we looked at our WIA sports from fall, winter, and spring, they were categorized as low, moderate, or high risk. Understand that WIA is meeting next week. There is some movement in southeast Wisconsin to consider flip-flopping some of the sports from fall to spring or spring to fall. By definition, that would eliminate any kind of state championships because that is not something that universally likely would occur unless WIA mandated it. I can tell you that yesterday I was on a conference call for 2 hours with WIA representatives and also with our superintendents, and I am highly doubtful that WIA will come out with a statewide decision, which means that we'll be experiencing very local decisions that also cut across public health. And so tonight you're going to hear how we have tried to respond to the 3 guiding agencies around recommendations and for modifying our on-site programs, but realize that ultimately we are in Pierce County and the public health department does have the power to isolate and also quarantine any individual that tests positive for COVID. In addition, because we are open and increase the probability of students or faculty, staff being exposed, that will be determined by public health and not by the Prescott Public Schools, Cassie, or myself. That is a decision that will be made hopefully in partnership, and we've had a good partnership with AZ Snyder and her team, but realize that ultimately that call falls to her. Therefore, on Monday, we did meet on the plans that you all saw and that we'll be presenting here tonight. The Prescott Public Schools, and in blue, is just, this is what we're starting with. Return to on-campus learning August 31st to reacclimate, and more information will be coming out from each of the sites. Our official start date for the school year is September 1st. By definition, restarting and having students on campus is and will be considered low to moderate risk endeavor. We're going to share the frameworks that we use to develop the site plans to reduce and mitigate that contagion. Just want to quickly share with you, and then I'm going to turn over to Cassie to kind of walk you through our primary guiding principles that every single site and then our 3 departments from transportation, food service, and our custodians are following with regards to those 6 guiding principles. I'm going to use the high school. We want to make sure that you understood that our administrative team, staff, and Cassie were involved in every single site to look at a design team. As you know, from a guiding change, we have what is our specific goal, and our goal was to return to the physical learning environment during the 2020-21 school year. We knew that it's occurring during an active pandemic, and so while we're maintaining a safe learning environment, we can't eliminate all risk. We do have the information about what we know, what exists, and we'll walk through that when Cassie comes up. But understand that on our website, we do have links to Pierce County. It shares with you the incident rates, how many current cases, how many are hospitalized, how many are recovered. It also shares how many individuals have died. To this point, no individuals have died from COVID in Pierce County. And so we'll continue to hope that that maintains, but a lot of it is due to probably some of the steps that have occurred. What was unacceptable was for any of our sites to come back and say that we would ignore the pandemic, that we wouldn't make any adjustments, and that we would violate any state or federal guidelines, and that we wanted to make sure that we would not also leave practices to individuals within classrooms, families, or community members to make decisions that impact not only our staff and school community, but by extension, its families and our greater community of Prescott. We also had what we were aiming for, and we wanted to make sure that we had equitable learning opportunities for all students. You're going to hear some of our off-campus learning lessons learned, what will continue, and some technological investments that we've made and will continue to make to get more access through hotspots and computers for families that need it. We also wanted to make sure that we weren't turning on and off the light switch, so that if students came back and because of transportation, which you had to make a very tough decision on earlier today, that became where we would have crossover and increase the likelihood of students passing on the contagion and having us to either close grade levels or schools, because we didn't believe that that was in the best interest of our students, much less trying to balance both the family needs, families that work, single parents, and also the economy. So put all that together, it's not easy. Again, my thanks to the staff that participated. We will share this with you and entertain any questions throughout. We're going to start with Cassie and then walk through from an elementary to a high school level. I've asked them to identify things that are remaining the same, kind of ensuring that the full academic programs and physical activities and things like that are available, but also to share with you some of the major shifts that will occur so that we're not redundant. Understand that anything that Sarah begins with is our base package, and then as Michael goes with MIS, Kyle with the middle school, and then Josh at the high school, they will kind of differentiate how they go the next level. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cassie. Thank you very much again for all of your work since March and engaging, and also working with all of our teams. And I'll get you set up here as we follow. So do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ongoing communication that's taken place so far, where it's going, and then also I would navigate to our website so we could direct people to that as well.
Yep. So since March, I've been in at least weekly contact with, on a state level. So we have a DPI nurse consultant that leads a meeting. It was weekly. Now during the summer, she's cut back to just monthly. But beginning again in August, it'll be weekly. So I'm engaged on the state level. I have weekly meetings with Pierce County. A lot of times that's more like daily, but it's for sure weekly. I've also been on CDC calls and webinars to just learn as much as we can. I'm in constant contact with the nurses throughout Pierce County to try and just maintain consistency and really, take some of the work burden off and work together. And we also have a medical director, Dr. Sarah Markert. She's local, so she's part of this decision as well. So we've multifaceted working groups, and that'll continue for the foreseeable future. So I don't see anything changing there. And one of the things after school got out is I started a newsletter. So right now it's monthly. Dr. Slukuza did ask that if needed, it's more often. So right now we're just at monthly. The second one just went out. It's emailed out to parents and it's on our website in multiple spots.
Yep,
So
so I
if you
pulled
wanna-
up the website, and a tab that's been added for everybody is at the very top, About Us, goes all the way to COVID, and R2L stands for Return to Learn. You can find news and information. Our nurses newsletter will continue to put there, parent and guardian information, the goals for, from DPI, and then the Pierce County dashboard. And I was thinking of going there first and then have you
Yeah.
go back, okay? And if you want to just kind of explain the data that's available here, how accurate or up-to-date is this information, and how does this guide some of the things, the decisions that we're going to share next?
Yeah, so it does list the total number of cases and it breaks it down to active. And then with that, the probable cases, so those are close contacts of the actual people that tested positive. So they may not have been tested, but due to their close contact, they're considered as having COVID. The outbreaks, they do have to list the residential outbreaks for 28 days. So that is still that first outbreak in River Falls that was all over the news. So that'll kind of come off there after that 28-day period, once they can ensure that it's truly over. And there have been multiple occupational outbreaks, mainly in River Falls, but it is, now spreading throughout the county as well. So in the upper right-hand corner, that little red circle that says hi, that's what's really going to impact school closures and sports and things like that. So the way that we get into this high status is based on the trajectory that's predicted and then the burden on our healthcare system and public health. So looking at those two things, it was the trajectory that actually bumped us up to the high this time. We were doing really well. We remained at moderate for quite a while, but this spike is not slowing down, and it's not looking like it's going to turn around anytime soon.
Anything here to point out?
So really just on the right-hand side, the two green circles, that's just telling us if public health is still able to manage what's going on in the county or not. And then it kind of compares to the rest of the counties in this region. So this is the newest page. It does break it down by age group, and that's where you can see that the most recent outbreaks have included more of the younger generations. So not quite school age, more after high school, in the 20s. So we do have some hospitalized, we do have some in the ICU, but we still remain at 0 deaths. Can you go back one more?
Yep.
Okay, so, restrictions, the bullet that says visitors and field trips and events, that's something that is addressed in all the return to learn plans. There will be visitor restrictions, and that's just to protect our students and staff, so that we can control, when they're entering, we can screen them, those types of things. Field trips have been canceled. Large group assemblies and events like that have also been canceled for right now, and probably most of the fall. the attendance line. That was just part of this last newsletter that I put out. That's gonna be a huge part of, fall. So when, it's gonna be even more important for parents to call their students in sick and leave more of a detailed message, not just, my kid has a fever. We need to know what their symptoms are, when they started. If they have multiple symptoms, we need to know all of them. We need to know if you've taken them to be tested or not, and then eventually what the results are. So that'll be an ongoing process. It will be included in all of my communication going out the rest of this year, or this fall. And really, the more detailed messages we can get from parents, the less follow-up I need to do with my nurses right away that same day. So that'll take, which takes time away from our students while they're there, so.
Cassie, can I ask, how does,
Yeah.
is it HIPAA that we follow in the schools? How does that align with this information and being able to share it?
So, we can't share with staff that aren't directly involved in that student's care. So, me as the nurse, I don't get those attendance line calls. So that's, the secretaries that do, but they're also my health assistants when I'm not in the building. So they're my first line of defense, and then we have a tracking system. And that comes directly to me and Mel, the other nurse. And as far as, are you more like referring to like
Like, will the
public health?
teacher know? Will
Yeah,
the
so
other
there are
kids in-
times that we do let the teacher know, because they are directly involved with that student. But there's times, you know, the break room, the hallways, things like that, we really crack down on that. So, it's a need to know if you're directly involved with the student.
And then Cassie, can you speak to just our legal obligation to communicate in a reciprocal way with public health? And then also the 3 letters that we'll send, similar to what we do if head lice is identified?
Yeah, so for communicable diseases, we are required to report to public health when we get notified of them. And we're also, with that, required to provide student information and parent contact information. And part of that this fall will include parent emails, because that's how public health will do the majority of their close contact notifications is through email.
And does the same kind of principles that we're following apply for if staff have COVID?
Yes. Yep, it's a reportable disease, so we have to know about it. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second thing you asked me to talk about?
Just if we hear or learn, how might we communicate out to, if a student or staff is identified in a building or classroom or on the bus, what's our way of communicating that out?
Yeah, so right now, in our weekly meetings with the county, we're working on standard letters. So they're pre-written, ready to go, to notify, depending on the situation. So if it's in an elementary building, you know, can we notify the class? Then what's our next step? The building, and then the district. So it'll be a tiered approach and very situational dependent.
Thank you. Anything about tracing?
Contact tracing?
Yeah.
Yes. So we're gonna be a huge part of the contact tracing because we have the students with us for so many hours during the day. So that's already been a huge part of our conversations, starting with the buses. So we're keeping them by family groups. We have assigned seating. Now with the extra bus routes, we can space them out as well. So that'll reduce the risk even more. There'll be assigned seats in classrooms. And then we need to track the smaller cohorts within the classroom as well. So there's multiple levels of, you know, recording that the teachers will need to do, so that I can produce an effective contact tracing list to public health within a few hours of request. And that'll really start, so if someone's identified at school, it's gonna start right then and there. We're not gonna wait for public health to call. So then,
And the important piece on that is, obviously, we do have to follow the Director of Public Health, and if we're unable to provide this kind of information, then she will have to use a very blunt instrument and say, I have to isolate or quarantine the grade level or the building. If we're able to follow these protocols and get that information in time, it will reduce the number of individuals that might have to be isolated and quarantined. So there's a purpose behind it. It is going to be an element of
Yes.
new protocols, but it's to sustain the majority of kids and staff on site.
yep.
I don't want to jump ahead, but you brought up isolation and stuff, so if there was a student, and the contact tracing, it sounds like is just kind of making sure we can identify who they were in close contact with, who's at risk. And so right now, it's potential that that group of students would also need to be quarantined during that period of time, is that correct? If somebody
Correct.
tests positive?
Yep, so if we get a positive test, the first group we're gonna look at are the individuals or students that were within 6 feet of them for more than 15 minutes. And that's gonna be our first initial, that's your group that's gonna be isolated. Depending on the building, our next step is looking at the classroom. And a whole classroom might be excluded, and need to remain home. And that was the third page of the nursing newsletter, the student exclusion criteria, so that was set up by public health.
So not a choice of ours, I mean, this is something that we don't have control over, but
Yep.
by being able to have good bus routes and seating and stuff, we can limit the amount of kids
Yes.
that would potentially need to be quarantined.
Mhm.
Okay, good.
Yep,
Good clarification, thank you.
and that is consistent countywide. All the health departments and school nurses have adopted that same tree. So then, the education and behavioral practices, these were pulled from the CDC, the Wisconsin Department of Health Services, Wisconsin DPI. Many of these are in the American Academy of Pediatrics as well, so they're all pretty consistent. Good hand hygiene, that's there whether we're in a pandemic or not, but it's even more important now. And then you add the level of masks in there as well, so good hand hygiene before and after touching your mask, just to help reduce the risk of self-contamination with that. Obviously, when you use the restroom, before you eat, things like that. So not much has changed except adding that mask layer in there. The second one is social distancing. The golden rule there has been 6 feet. There are situations where it's a little bit larger, but for everyday school life, it'll be 6 feet. Wearing a cloth face covering, again, that's recommended by all of them. This helps to protect others from your respiratory droplets, but it also helps provide you a barrier for your mouth and nose so that others' respiratory droplets aren't just able to enter. So it does give you one more possible prevention aspect there as well. And the recommendation there for cloth face coverings is that they should be worn in public, and even more important when you can't social distance. The next one is monitoring symptoms daily. So the first thing we want to know, and that's been in every one of my newsletters so far, is the symptoms. And if you notice from the first one to the second one, the CDC added more symptoms. So those are reflected in my newsletter as well. So we want parents and staff to all know the symptoms and what to watch for, and that it's a change from baseline. So if we have a student that has allergies and has a constant runny nose, we know that, and we're watching for the change. We're not just, oh, you have a runny nose, you're out. So really getting to know our students, and that's where our health office staff, I mean, comes in handy, because we know quite a few of them. So any student, that shows symptoms during the school day, they're not gonna come to our regular health office. They're gonna be rerouted to a different room that's dedicated just to students with symptoms, COVID-like symptoms. We'll evaluate them there. Parents will be called to come and pick them up, and we are asking that they're there within an hour. And this is just to help protect all staff and students involved, because there may be more students coming into this room, so we don't want them in there together for any longer than they have to be.
Can I ask a question about isolation rooms? And it just reminds me of special education rooms and how we can't have, so if a student chose to leave that room, even though we asked them not to, I mean, we wouldn't be able to restrain them. I mean, they're gone, they just leave and stuff like that then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. But we'll distance them in that room.
With a staff member?
Yep, we'll be monitoring them, and they will be asked to wear a mask while they're in there, just to protect themselves and the staff. And part of this monitoring for symptoms is gonna be on parents, so, that'll be my next communication that goes out, is that we need parents to help with this. We need them to, check students before they send them to school, because we don't want an outbreak. So it's really vital that if your student is sick, that you keep them home. The next one is avoiding touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Again, that's normal in everyday life. Those are your main points of entry for any virus or bacteria. But now with the mask in there, it is more important. You want to use the good hand hygiene, like I said earlier, before and after touching your mask, before and after removing your mask. And again, the coughing and sneezing into a Kleenex if you can, washing your hands after that. So that's really nothing new. Then the last one is cohorting. That's a big recommendation. So we want to keep smaller groups together, as small as possible, and we have the ability to do that on different levels based on the building we're in. So some buildings it's easy for us to do, and some buildings we can't do it. So it's really, the more of these prevention strategies that we can use, the better we're gonna mitigate the risk to our students and staff.
I have a question regarding masks. I know,
Yep.
I think everyone's inundated with a lot of information, and you kind of start to get glazed over, but relative to what Prescott School District is doing, as far as what's mandated and what's optional for mask wearing?
Yeah, so that was my next topic.
Oh, good. I meant to lead into that.
Yes.
Thank you.
So we are requiring every student to have cloth masks, and that's reflected in their supply list. We do have donations, some from the state, in different agencies. So for those that can't, we do have supply. The degree to which each student will be required to wear masks is based on age and developmental level, and our ability to implement different prevention techniques within those buildings. So it's not gonna look the same at the elementary as it does at the high school. And really, the decision to require masks is based on all of those 6 prevention techniques that I just discussed, which again were pulled from the CDC, DPI, DHS, and Public Health, and even listed on the American Academy of Pediatrics. So when one or more of those prevention strategies can't be put in place, that's when we weigh the other ones heavier, and we feel that the need to put those in place is there. So for example, the elementary school, we can cohort and we can prevent crossover between cohorts extremely well. So there, the mask, the weight of masking the kids is a lot less. So there's times where they're in their classroom where they don't have to wear a mask. And that fits the age and developmental recommendations as well. On the other hand, the high school, we can't cohort, and we can't social distance a lot of times when they're in the classroom. So with that, we have two of the main prevention strategies that we can't use. So masks is the main prevention strategy that's left. So that's why we're requiring it. We need to have one that's in play to help reduce that risk and mitigate what we can. Our ultimate goal is to keep the students and staff safe. We want the kids there just as much, if not more, than the parents do. And we want to remain open as long as we can. So by having that one prevention strategy in place, we'll be able to hopefully stay open more than just a week or a day. Or we know that there's a huge social emotional aspect of being in school, and really that's what we all want, and that's our goal. Do have
Thank you.
anything else?
And just to let you know, as you go through the plans, Cassie is still here and will be able to kind of chime in. We're going to shift now to the three departments of transportation, food service, and our custodial staff. If Tim, Tina, and Mike want to come up, you can social distance. We'll start with Tim. What we wanted to kind of share, obviously, you know that we already had to make some adjustments on route changes, and that'll start to allow Tim to get that into the system, and then we'll start informing families of both the decision, but also how all the bus routes and things like that are changed. But Tim, do you want to share a little bit of some of the protocols that are in place and some of the preventative things that you are putting in place? I also want to thank Mike and Tina, because these three have been working and kind of supporting each other, and you'll see a lot of crossover, but it's not by accident. It's because the three of them have been wonderful in teaming. So, Tim?
Okay, so some of the additions and changes that we have done and are going to be doing with the school buses. We have already installed hand sanitizer dispensers in the entrance of each bus. So as students get on or leave, they can pump a little hand sanitizer onto their hands. It's very accessible to all students. Each driver will disinfect the interior of their bus every time they return to the bus garage. So we got a system set up with equipment that they can go through, disinfect the bus, so that the next time we reload it, it's clean and disinfected. And we've mentioned this before, we have created seating assignments, and doing this, we're putting families together, so this helps so that the more availability for single family students to be in a seat by themselves. When possible, we're going to try to keep the seat behind the driver empty. So if there's a student in there, we're going to have a student there that we can probably have off the bus as soon as possible. Saying that, 13 of my 16 drivers are old enough for Social Security, so I'm looking out for their safety also. Because of the choices tonight, we'll be able to restructure our country bus routes and have much fewer kids on them, allowing us to have smaller bus routes. In the morning when we come to the schools, we stagger our buses and go to different schools at different times, and then we're going to try to have one bus unload kids at a time. So if a driver pulls into a school, a bus is unloading, they're supposed to wait till they're gone so them kids can head into the school. We're going to unload our school buses. Instead of, normally we would stop at the daycares load up the 20, 25 kids on the bus. Now we're gonna unload these buses, go back to them daycares, load them, and then take them to school later. We already do this in the afternoon, there's a separate route. We have purchased face shields that pretty much covers the side from the ears around for the bus drivers. We're asking the drivers to provide their own masks. The PM bus pickup at the schools will be completely restructured, so we have no students transferring from bus to bus anymore. That's the carousel that we talked about earlier. So all these buses, we're sending all buses to all schools. So we're gonna plan to get that in place, pretty much got it figured out. We're not allowing students to go home with other students on the bus. We've always allowed for students to go to birthday parties or just to go to a friend's place. From now on, parents are going to have to make their own arrangements for that type of transportation. And then for tracing, 2 years ago we installed cameras in the buses. So if there's something that comes up and Cassie needs us to go back and look, find out who a certain student might have been around, we should have that capability of doing that too. And that's that.
Thank you, Tim.
Hello. So for the food services, things that are going to be trying to stay the same, I'm going to try to keep as similar of a menu that we have had in the past. I'm going to start that way anyway and see if there's any issues and adjust accordingly as we go along. Kind of one exception would be like breakfast time, trying to avoid syrup items as some of the breakfasts will be in the classrooms. Students are still going to come through the cafeteria line to receive their food. So they're going to be sent down in, limited amount of kids at a time to come through the line. And we're also going to still try to offer some a la carte items at the high school and middle school. Things that are going to be different, there's not going to be any pin pads at the end of the line at the cashier. We've purchased barcode scanners, and the high school and middle school levels will be having a ID card, and that's going to have the barcode scanner on that they'll just be able to run that under the scan. The elementary and intermediate schools, we're going to set up like a roster sheet per classroom, and then that cashier can take the scanner and scan those codes. The students will not be grabbing like their own trays or silverware at the beginning of the line, even though they are coming through the line. That stuff is all going to be done by staff. We will have their trays, put the food on it, and then hand it to them at the end. At the elementary, intermediate, and middle school, they are going to be utilizing some classrooms for eating the lunch to provide distancing. So that's how we're separating the overcrowding of the cafeteria. And then at the high school, we've added additional lunch period. So we're separating kids that way. We've made sure that all the lunch schedules have time for cleaning tables between each group so that they're not coming in right on top of each other, and we can get all the tables cleaned before the next group sits down. All the staff that are serving food will be wearing a face mask or a shield. There's not gonna be any condiment carts anymore, so at the upper levels, we'll probably be bringing in packets of, individual ketchups and such. At the lower levels, we'll probably be doing more of staff helping portion it on the tray before it's handed to them. And then, as I mentioned, some breakfasts at like the elementary and intermediate school, they'll come through the line, but they're going to be bringing that down to the classroom to eat it. so that they're staying in their cohorts. So those are most of the differences that we're putting into place. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. And Mike Hoyka with Grounds and Facilities.
Yeah, starting before students come back, we're going to review with all custodial staff, starting next week with a review of proper use of cleaning and disinfectants, cleaning procedures and likes, and also we've added some electrostatic spraying machines. We're still waiting for some of them to come in, but that's going to be something added to cleaning, when we clean the rooms and disinfect them. So we'll be reviewing all that, and then also with lunches being different and in different locations, we'll have to reschedule during the day how we're gonna clean those areas afterwards. So we'll be looking at a lot of that. We're also gonna review all proper PPEs for our custodial staff, review all high touch point areas with that, along with their annual training with IEA, which is our environmental company we work with. They'll be doing some additional training for them relating to disinfecting just on COVID and different surfaces on that. So as far as cleaning products, disinfectants, soaps, paper products, we all know they've been in a hiding man. We have been, as of today or last week, we have 50% of our annual products on hand. So we'll have plenty of products to clean and disinfect properly. Like I say, we have 3 more backpacks, electrostatic sprayers on order to assist with disinfecting all surfaces. All the disinfectant products we use are EPA registered to work against the COVID-19 virus. And then we have asked and went around with some of the principals to schools in the classrooms and kind of went through any non-essential items in a classroom that should be removed that would be hard to disinfect, properly clean. So we kind of went through that. As far as drinking fountains in the hallways and classrooms, if it's just a bubbler, we're shutting them off and capping them. But we are leaving the bottle fillers operational, so we don't have a transmission right at the water fountains. So a lot of change there. Another thing I'm looking at is on our HVA system, looking with ASHRAE, going over heating and cooling. You know, we've always ran good quality filters. We're going to continue to do that. We'll probably maybe look at changing them out more frequently. Increasing the percentage of outside air that we bring in. 3 of our buildings have really good monitoring systems as far as on CO2 levels. As far as the amount of fresh air we bring in, they'll automatically increase if need be. And we also have really good dehumidification on some of the buildings, some upgrades we're working on, trying to improve some of that. We'll probably operate our systems more as, especially when we're in a high cooling, where you're recirculating a lot of air. We'll probably look at starting, when students come in, starting up prior, a couple hours early to school, 2 hours more, and 2 hours afterwards, just to exchange the air more in the building. And just looking at the overall HVAC stuff to increase air quality in the building. So.
A lot of work across these 3 departments. You can see that they've had to redesign and re-engineer a lot of our current practices. Both Tim and Mike are also in the process of hiring. Mike is still closing in on trying to at least get back to where we were, and then work on the sub pool. Tim has all the drivers, but he also has a bigger sub pool than previously, and Tina has a few food service positions that she's closing in on. So Staffing-wise, I think we're good. You can see that we're also spending additional dollars, both on equipment and product. And once we get to technology, you'll see additional investments that are required that we historically haven't had to do. So, any questions for the three of them before we transition into each of the sites?
Well, I just had a quick, Tim, will there be extra, I can repeat your answer in here if you want, but will there be extra staff on the buses at all to help? It sounds like a lot for a bus driver.
Okay, go ahead with that again.
Will there be extra staff on the bus to help the bus driver with all the new procedures and stuff put in place, like assigned seats and stuff like that?
Not at this time. I do believe that the staff can manage that, especially with the country bus routes, knowing exactly who's going to be getting on at each stop. It'll be a little more difficult with the one bus that we have that's on the outskirts of town here. But that driver, I believe, is very capable of managing that also. If we do need it, it probably would only be for the start of the school, for the first week,
Right.
maybe for some of the youngest kids.
Perfect.
But at this time, I don't plan on having it.
Thank you.
All right, let's move
All
on.
right, we're going to switch through and start with Principal Dusick with Malone Elementary. We're going to kind of build off of the three departments, how that runs through the building, and then also the six guiding principles that Cassie shared with you.
If you don't mind, Rick, can we try to limit each one of these to, I don't know, is 5 minutes fair? Is
Yeah.
it 3 minutes?
We're aiming
Even better.
for- yeah,
All right.
yeah.
I just want to make sure we're keeping going. All right. Thank you.
Do I hear two? Two
You
in
don't
the
want to be here till midnight? Neither. All right, so we've talked a lot tonight about the cohort model, and because elementary schools basically operate in a cohort model, the changes were pretty limited that we had to make. In the classrooms, I think staff and students and families will see that there's really not much change inside the classroom. There's a few tweaks that have to happen. We're cohorting inside the classroom, but then we're also going to ask teachers to cohort inside their classroom cohort to keep certain kids interacting with each other throughout the weeks. Another big change was with the visitor restrictions. We aren't going to have visitors on site during the instructional hours of the day. That presented a little bit of an obstacle with our office not being in a secure location, so we had to restructure some of our office staff. I worked with Mark anyway in the student services office to make sure that we had 2 secretaries in the elementary office at one time, so we had a runner that could meet people at the front door if somebody had to drop something off or not. Another big change is our specialist class. Typically, kids would go to a specialist classroom and they would see each specialist teacher, STEM, art, media, and music, at least once a week. And what we're going to do is we're going to switch that to the specialist teachers will be going into a classroom, and they'll be going into a classroom for a week at a time. So one kindergarten class will have music for an entire week, another one will have STEM for an entire week, another one will have music, and another one will have art for the entire week, and then we'll switch specialists into that following week with the weekend time to let things disinfect. Phi-Ed will stay on an every other day schedule like it has been because we can have Phi-Ed outside. And then we're working with Mr. Munson to have him create some health and wellness, nutrition, social emotional lessons that he could do inside the classroom if it's inclement weather and they can't go outside. And then Tina already touched a little bit on the lunch locations. We won't be having all grade levels eat in the gym. We have identified 4 different spaces where they can socially distance better. And we've staggered our lunch times so that each location has a 10-minute dry time before the next group comes into that space. And also staggered it so that only one class is waiting in the lunch line to receive their food at a time. And then recess, that's a little bit of a change too. They won't be coupled into the lunchtime as they have been in the past. We scheduled it away from lunch. and they'll have identified spaces on the playground that they can go to. We have the 3 baseball fields and then the blacktop where they'll rotate towards. And they won't be able to use the playground equipment on a daily basis because it's just impossible to disinfect that between groups. It would take a custodian entire day to do that. So those are the pretty major changes that are happening at the elementary level.
Yeah, just one quick question if I can. The specialist classes, art, music, maybe STEM, could have some seasonality to them. Is there any concern as far as some kids getting this and some kids getting that, but everyone not getting everything?
I've been working with the specialist teachers on that, and they've identified different ways that it could work in that space.
Okay.
We looked at doing a quarter system, like having them have each one for a quarter. And that was really a big obstacle for media because not seeing kindergartners until the end of the year with media and doing some of the programming that they do, or seeing them only for the front part of the year if they don't identify letters. A lot of her learning takes place with letter identification. And
Okay, cool, thank you.
I had one other question, and I think it's probably going to be a common question. I think it's maybe more for the board, but I do believe we have a policy that kids have 30 minutes for lunch. Is that correct?
no.
I thought we did. Okay. Well,
I'll verify.
okay.
Yes, yep.
Anyways, I was just wondering if there was something that we had to change with that, if it was a board thing, if there was.
So right now, the lunches are the same length that they've been historically. We had to play a little bit with, the 2 teachers have a 30-minute duty-free lunch, so we worked
Okay.
around that and figured that out. But
Okay.
our lunches are 20 minutes, and that's what they've been
Okay.
historically in the
I
past.
thought we had added that a couple when we did that process. I don't know if Michael remembers, but we can verify later. I was just curious.
Yeah. Before you step away, just at the bottom of your presentation, can you just quickly talk about off-campus and also the hybrid?
Okay. So off-campus learning, we did a survey at the end of off-campus learning last year, and we learned that at the elementary level, we stayed really packet-based, and there were a couple reasons for that. One was we know that there's areas in Prescott that don't get great Wi-Fi, and we figured if there were areas that did, that older siblings, high school, middle school, intermediate, and families working from home would probably have priority to any devices. So we kind of knew that on the device tree, K2 was kind of low-hanging fruit, for lack of a better term. And so we're going to kind of marry the two, and we'll do some virtual learning and some packet-based learning where we'll provide Google Meet sessions, virtual lessons that teachers teach and we'll send to families. And then the other big change that we had is we are adopting the Seesaw platform to help with communication and delivery of instruction. This spring, we used Dojo as a big communication piece, which was clunky for a lot of families and a lot of staff. And then some teachers used Google Classroom, some teachers used Google Meets, and Seesaw kind of marries the purpose of Dojo with the purpose of Google Classroom to make it one platform that families can use. And then we know that districts that already had Seesaw in place, when they transitioned from on-campus learning to off-campus learning, it was a really seamless transition. So our hope would be that at the beginning of school, we'll really start working with the kids to know and understand Seesaw and how to use it, so that when and if we have to transition to off-campus learning, then Seesaw will be available to us. And then the virtual hybrid, I think some of it we have ideas in mind and plans in place, but a lot of it will depend on once we get information back from families on how many and who are withholding, to help us finalize, will we pull a teacher from a classroom to do just virtual instruction, or will we provide virtual instruction throughout the learning day that already exists?
Perfect.
I went over 3 minutes.
All right. Thank you. Principal Kozmowski, welcome. This is the first formal meeting to have you present with everybody else, and you're going to be covering MIS.
And on that note, I would like to thank the school board for providing me with the opportunity to serve in this capacity and trusting me with this position. So I want to thank my colleagues, those the present, and those I currently have, and past colleagues and mentors that have prepared me for this endeavor. I'm excited for the opportunity and the journey that lies ahead, and partnering with the MIS staff and families and our greater community to provide a great learning experience for all. So thank you for that. Ms. Dusick covered a lot of mine. Very similar things. There are a few things different between the two buildings. One, the spacing within the building. Cassie and I measured hallways and things like that as we toured, and the ability that we have is a little bit different than the elementary, but a lot of the same things. The weekly rotation of specials will happen in this building as well. The music special will be the only special that can never use their room, and the reason why is because the music room will be used as cafeteria space. So that will be a unique one. Another unique thing to this building is that we have a very large gym with a curtain in between, and it's not used as a cafeteria. So we have some opportunities there where we could have some potential in, over the winter months, or even on rainy days, where we could have gym inside of the gym with social distancing and masking protocols being followed. A few other instructional things that will change for us. There was a big push a few years back to go to flexible seating. So with the mini cohort within the cohort model, we can still do some of that flexible seating, but more on a weekly or bi-monthly basis that we'd be able to rotate and disinfect in between. But really, besides for that, breakfast will be in the classroom like we talked about. There's going to be a lot of additional supervision that's needed because we're not going to have kids going out to the playground when they first get to school. They're going to go directly into their classrooms. We have a much larger green space. We have a walking track, areas that we can use for recess. So we can't have recess coinciding with the same time as Phi Ed, whereas the elementary just doesn't have enough green space to allow that. So potentially we can look at our schedule and moving that, and then that, having the staggered start and end to lunch, that will be different versus all of fourth grade is from 12 to 12:30. Instead, every classroom will stagger by a 5-minute stagger in between. Jungle gym structure area, we do not have structural damage at the intermediate school. However, we cannot guarantee use before, after school on the weekends. So that will be an area that is still off limits for us during the school year. And then building access, we talked about, it's a little bit different. Our office isn't in the middle of the building, but it is up a flight of stairs. So like I told Kathy and Tammy, make sure they have their jogging shoes on because they will be getting a lot of steps in. They will be meeting people at the door. Unique to us is we also have the district office in the building. So if someone identifies that they're here for district office, we then are working with Beth Linderholm and having a calling tree protocol of who calls, who meets them at the door, do they have a scheduled meeting or not, do they need to schedule a meeting, all those sort of things. Late arrivals, early departures, again, meeting parents at the door as well. And we've started to talk about, that'll be our next phase, is that hybrid learning or the online learning, and how much of it is packet-based, how much of it is that asynchronous via the packet, via teacher videos, via videos we find online, and then how much of it is actually synchronous, where the teacher is live at that time teaching the lesson, above and beyond what we did this spring, where the teacher was live and doing small group, more of social emotional type lessons, but how do we actually get to the core content? So that'll be our next steps. Any questions?
Questions, anybody? Keep going. Thanks, Michael.
Mr. Igo, middle
Good evening,
school.
everyone. And again, as Michael and Sarah have presented, our visitor, a couple of the major changes that we have, I don't have listed on here, but our visitor access is going to be very similar to Michael's. And Sarah's will be meeting people at the door and those things. Things that are going to be different than what you heard from those two, though, and major changes that we have. The middle school is going to look significantly different this year in how we operate. One is because we are going to operate the cohort model. I mean, they have done that forever in the K-5 model, but the middle school, we traditionally have change classes and mixed classes, and that's when they really start to get that integration into how they're going to live life in the high school. This year we're going to go to the cohort model, and I believe that we're going to be able to schedule all of our students in cohorts, and we have roughly 100 students per class, so we'll have about 25 students in each cohort. And so that's going to be a pretty major change for our student population. In these cohorts, they're going to go to all of their core classes and the majority of their exploratory classes. The one exception would be for band, choir, and some of these STEM classes that offset that. Band and choir this year will be in sectional numbers. And when we say in sectional numbers, we will not have a large group ensemble. I've worked with both of our music teachers about this. And if you look at our bell schedule, it's probably a little difficult to read. But we have it so that way our numbers are de-densified and we are able to keep our sectional numbers. And in some cases, they're going to have a sectional of 13 to 15 kids. Rather than seeing an entire class of, I think Ms. Heffler's largest class last year was 64, and Ms. Walker's largest class was something like 61 at one time. So we're able to reduce that down into 15, sometimes 18, sometimes 20. But so everything will be done in sectional music groups rather than large group ensembles. And that's all because we're able to do some things in cohorts. So they'll break away from their cohorts for that time period. But again, those kids will, it's a lot more complicated than how I kind of have it listed out. But once they get their schedules, they'll be able to follow it easily. We've also changed the way that we are going to operate lunches. All of our lunch groups, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, will eat in classrooms. We will rotate which cohorts get to eat in the cafeteria. My team, the Return to Learn team, has asked that we rotate daily. That way each teacher at least has one day per week that they're not eating with their students in the classroom. Along with the cohort model, students will stay in a classroom and the teachers will rotate. All teachers will live on carts. And again, we're minimizing the amount of travel, the amount of mixing of students and whatnot. All teachers will wear masks. And we set up a mask consideration and a mask protocol of when masks are going to be required for students and staff, when they are not required and just recommended. And as we start to talk about that, staff will be required to wear masks probably more frequently and more often because they are traveling from room to room on a cart. Students are going to stay in there. A couple of major things to remember about our mask considerations are, as Cassie talked about, we are looking for physical distancing. At the middle school, we have some of our classrooms that historically we have put 30 and 32 students in there. Following physical distancing rules and guidelines, we can have 8 people in there. So when we talk about having 6 feet apart, I can now fit 8 students in those classrooms, 8 people in those classrooms, where I used to have 32. So when we talk about some of the mask considerations, it kind of gives a different perspective. The high school is going to have some different mask considerations. They're in larger rooms, they have larger hallways, they have larger spaces, with roughly the same number per class or the same amount of students per class. So some of the times that our students at the middle school may be required to wear a mask are going to be a little bit different than what that looks like at the high school because of the size of our individual classrooms. Anytime that we're in a common space, in a hallway, traveling to and from, students will be in a mask. Again, our hallways are extremely narrow. In order to keep our physical distancing from each other, you have to rub your shoulder on one wall and the other wall, and you cannot go anywhere in between the lockers. In between the lockers, you have about 4.5 feet from one locker to the next on either side. And again, you have to imagine in these hallways that are about 4.5, almost 5 feet wide between lockers, I'm pushing, for the 8th grade class, 118 students through that hallway. And so you talk about proper physical distancing, it just can't, it doesn't happen during that time. So we have to make sure that during our common times and common spaces, we wear a mask. Classrooms, that, and again,
so,
most of our classrooms.
Mr. Agnew, can I ask, so what we'll do is we're going to have all the sites now
Yep.
talk about masks. You're going
Okay.
to lead it off, and then it'll go up to high school and then down to elementary. The format is the same.
Format's the same?
So could you just explain the green through red, what the levels mean? And then this is going to be a handout that will be going out to staff and then out to families.
So our levels over there, and in the area that's on the bottom is the current Pierce County Health risk status. That's the area that may need to change still. All of these are still some fluid documents. But as you see our levels, you can read across the top of what they are. Right now, we are in the level 2 area. We still have documented cases. We have that area. So we would have to follow the masks that are required and recommended based on our criteria that would be below. All of our criteria below is, again, what I was starting to explain, how large our classrooms are, what we're doing within our classrooms, how many students are there, and all of those different parts and natures.
So you can see that on the far right, there be times that masks will be worn or they're recommended, and obviously it depends on kind of the situation and the size of the classroom.
And
or
what
the-
they're doing in class for the day.
You okay to transition to the high school mask piece? Josh, do you want to come up and I'll pull up your, thought I had it. One sec. Oh, I got that, yep. So this is the high school version. Again, the same titles across the top. At the time these were created, we were considered a level 2. I don't know, Cassie, we've moved to level 3. So that, it refers back to that website where you saw the red dot. So you can see that it either goes from required, recommended to all times. So know that this is fluid, right? It's going to depend on external things. And then we always go by location, the situation, and the rules. You want to just walk through some of the major?
Sure, and I think that's really important. As we were designing this, we understood that there were factors within the building, not only in terms of space, but in terms of physical distancing, in terms of type of activity, and that's where we started. But then we realized there was a second piece to this. So Prescott as a community is kind of a crossroads for transportation, where we have parents and families who go into the cities every day and come back. So we understood also that there was an external set of factors that needed to be taken into account. So that's what you see across the top there. And we also believed it was important that families saw that maybe masks, there was kind of a spectrum of when and to what degree they would be required. You know, no one wants to look at this and think that masks are required all times throughout the year, especially if things start to get better. So that's really kind of a sliding scale at the top. But below that, really what you can see is all the locations in the high school, and it's still a working document. And there are areas where it's unstructured time where masks are just going to have to be required. And then there are areas, for example, our standard classrooms, where if we can meet standard physical distancing requirements and appropriate activities that have fewer transmission of droplets, masks are simply recommended, not necessarily required. So anything in green is a recommendation only. Anything in red is a requirement only. Currently, we're under a high risk for Pierce County and surrounding counties, so all of those things are a moot point. Masks would be required full-time for students and staff in the building. Dr. Spiguzzi, you want me to go over anything else in terms of masks or types of activities?
Just wanted to see if there were any
Rationale.
questions. So secondary is a little bit different, both on the physical dimensions, and you can see external factors and internal factors also play in. We'll pivot to the elementary and MIS, but did you have anything else you wanted to speak about the masks? We are going to come back to your site.
Yep.
We're going to cover the spectrum of masks just to kind of break up, okay? I think I have yours, Sarah.
Like I said before, because we're able to operate more in our cohorts, masks aren't going to be as required as frequently as some of the other buildings. The main locations where masks are gonna be required is when students leave their classroom and go out into the communal areas, like the hallways, bathrooms, getting in line for lunch, going into the lunchroom. Once they get into the lunchroom, obviously, they'll demask, but then they'll mask back up to go back to their classes. And then inside the classroom, anytime they're doing whole group instruction, that's happening on their little 6x6 classroom rug, the students and the teachers will be asked to mask. But once they go back, like Michael talked about with their flexible seating, once they go back to their flexible space that's assigned for the week, once they're working within their classroom cohort, they won't have to wear a mask. For the most part, teachers will be able to keep cohorts together for small group instruction too, but not all kids perform the same in English language arts as they do in math. So there will be time where even inside their classroom cohort, their mini cohorts will have to kind of interact with each other in a small group instructional setting. And if they cross over into mini cohorts in that small group instructional setting, then while they're at the kidney table with their teacher getting that small group instruction, they'll be asked to mask during that time too. But then when they go back to their mini cohort space, they'll be able to demask.
And Mark, anyway, would you mind just talking briefly about some of the adaptations we're making for our deaf and hard of hearing students, the types of masks that we're providing both for the adult and students, but also maybe plexiglass and things like that in the special ed rooms?
Yeah, so obviously, one size does not fit all. So we have some students that have a variety of different issues or disabilities that they're trying to overcome. Deaf of heart and hard of hearing would be one of them. Obviously, a lot of our folks that struggle with that particular issue rely on lip reading. So we have ordered some masks with kind of a clear, like, cutout. So you are able to kind of see the mouth and read lips. We also have other students who either have more significant disabilities or sensory issues. So we have ordered some like plexiglass dividers or enclosures to help with that piece as well. So for some students, we are exploring alternative ways of maintaining safety when a physical mask might not always be feasible.
Thank you. And Mark and his staff have been part of every single site. We see this special education as a continuum, so they've been infused in all of these rather than just a special ed separate report. Okay. And Principal Kozmowski, do you want to come up?
Yeah, our masking protocol isn't, it's kind of a hybrid between the middle school and the elementary, just because of the space that we have and the space within the classrooms itself. So again, really making sure that we can maintain those mini cohorts within, and we can guarantee that there's going to be physical distancing between students and staff. So anytime that there's an uncommon staff member that's in the room, so all the specials teachers, aides, special education, really looking at them being masked throughout that. But then there's going to be ample time during the day where students would not need to be masked. Again, it's really those times when we can't guarantee the physical distancing. So hallways, bathrooms, to and from the cafeteria, obviously we'll take our masks off while we're eating, but then put them back on. We're out on the playground, outdoor, Phi-Ed can be unmasked, and then potentially even indoor Phi-Ed, depending on the distancing and if it's aerobic or anaerobic things that we're doing. And again, just like Mr. New was talking about, plexiglass barriers for special education, but then also for our small group intervention pull-out classes. And then as we talk about like our workshop model or our daily 5 model, when we have students come back to the kidney bean table with our teacher, sometimes it is good to have the mask off, so we're looking at plexiglass at those locations as well. And unlike the elementary, our conversations at the intermediate have been the removal of the 6x6 carpet, and we're not going to be pulling all of our kids together for that mini lesson. We're just going to do it at their desk, which then will give them another opportunity to have their masks off while the teacher is still masked during any of that direct instruction.
Thank you. Mr. Figge, we're going to have you come up, and one of the things I want to make note is that we have kind of extraordinary times, required extraordinary measures. you'll see that we are proposing a kind of a shift to how the academic year is carved. Historically, we've broken the year into semesters, and I'm going to share the plan for Mr. Figge to kind of walk us through and some of the rationale of why we had to make a shift for the upcoming year.
Sure. As my previous three colleagues talked about at the other three sites, kind of the big model to ensure safety is cohorting. And if you think about the high school level, with different electives, with different ability levels in classes, acceleration, kids who need a little bit more time, and then your kind of your baseline level of classes, it's either impossible to cohort students and maintain the high school model, or it takes somebody far more intelligent than me to figure out how it's going to happen. So I'd like to think that it's impossible. But who knows? So one of the biggest things that we're looking at this year is moving the high school, which traditionally has been on a semester-based schedule, 7-period day with an 8th period built in that we call cardinal time for interventions, to a trimester schedule that would be 3 by 5 periods. So instead of students taking 6 or 7 periods a day, they would take 5. And instead of semesters that are essentially 86 days long, we would be shifting to trimesters, which would be roughly 56 days long. The periods would switch from about 50 minutes per period in a day to 70 minutes. And one of the things our team looked at was obviously the safety associated with mitigating transmission of COVID-19. So if you think about a 5-period day versus a 7-period day, we have roughly 3 to 4 fewer unstructured transmission periods or transition periods between classes where kids are at their lockers, where kids are talking to friends, going to the bathroom, doing things that could result in transmission. They're getting 2 fewer periods a day. So if you think about a 25 to 30 student classroom, our kids will be seeing roughly 50 to 60 fewer kids a day. Our teachers will also be seeing significantly fewer kids a day. And we also, I don't want to forget about our teachers. Our teachers are probably our highest risk population if COVID-19 is transmitted to them in terms of negative health effects. So in addition to this, we know that we should expect at some point a high probability of going off-site for a certain period of time, whether that is a single class, whether that is a grade level, or whether that's an entire building. We know that feedback in terms of our class schedule for off-campus learning this past spring talked about the difficulty on the teacher side of managing 7 periods a day, but especially telling is students managing 6 or 7 periods a day, and some of those being some very accelerated classes and work piling on top of one another. So at a 5-period day, students would be able to manage 5 periods, 5 course levels much easier off-site. Teachers would be able to manage their course load much easier with fewer students. In addition to this, some of the things that don't appear on the sheet here, this allows us to eliminate study halls as a course offering for students, which has allowed us to repurpose those teachers to provide more sections of classes. And I just finished, fingers crossed, initial scheduling today, and it's lowered on average our class size by about 10 students per section for most of our classes. So in terms of mitigating the amount of students that each individual student would cross over with, it would be significant. I know some of the concern might be eliminating study halls or intervention periods. We've been able to build in an intervention period / study hall for students still in the middle of this day, so our kids wouldn't lose that educational opportunity as well. Then there are a number of educational benefits outside of COVID-19. So this allows us to, for those students who have struggled in the past and potentially failed a course, it allows the ability to retake that course midstream in the middle of the year, rather than either waiting until summer credit recovery or waiting until the following year, an entire academic year, to redo that learning opportunity. It allows more flexibility in most cases in student scheduling. So if you think about a student who maxed out their learning before, they were taking 7 periods for 2 semesters, they had 14 sections that they could fill up. Now students will be able to fill up 15 sections. If you had a student, which a significant population of our students took study halls before, if they were taking a study hall a semester, they were losing a lot of educational opportunities. Now we've built that in, so those students will actually have potentially 3 to 4 more learning opportunities or learning sections a year to take more academic opportunities or electives. And over the course of their academic career, that would be a significant increase, potentially 12 additional classes that they would be taking. So I'm going to pause there before we get to the physical restructuring, because my guess is there are a lot of questions. I do want to put a disclaimer on this. This is typically a process that would take anywhere from 12 to 18 to potentially 24 months to make a schedule change like this. It would have input from a lot of different stakeholder groups. You would do a lot of listening sessions. This is by no means the ideal circumstances and way that you would make this transition. I do want to assure you that we've had input from parents and parent groups on this. This is something we talked about prior to this year, that we've heavily looked at as a teacher group, different schedule opportunities and what this would bring, that our Return to Learn group had eyes on this, and from a teaching and educational standpoint, they believed that this was a positive change to make, especially under the current circumstances. But I do want that out there, that under normal circumstances, this would not be a 2 or 3 month switch. This would be a significantly longer process.
Anybody from the board have any questions for Josh right now?
It seems like, so there is more credit opportunities, but, and it sounds like this was a conversation you were already having. So is this something that we can kind of look at, see if it's an effective model, evaluate it, and decide that it's potential that we continue with this in the future? And if so, do you think that would change some of our credit graduation requirements and stuff like that we'd have to come back to?
Yes, I think that's the potential.
Okay,
I'm sure it's an effective model. That's all I went through high school.
yeah. Perfect, it turned out great.
And look where it got you.
We were going to contact you about the poster for this.
No, I mean, I think,
trimester student.
how about like Hudson, schools around here, do they typically do trimesters or semesters?
Well, I think you know that there are, the South Wash does trimesters. In the Middle Border Conference, Osceola is the only other school that's on a trimester schedule currently. Talking with their administration up there and some of their teachers, they love it. We structured ours very similar. I worked with Adam Spiegel, who's their principal up there, just to talk. You know, they had 18 months that they spent on theirs. We learned a lot from Mr. Spiegel and his staff and some of the bumps they experienced, so that we would hopefully be able to do it in a shorter amount of time.
And the other thing, I don't know if you mentioned or not, but it increases time in that one particular class, right? I mean, so you're in math class and you're learning the same content throughout the year, you got a little bit more time with your teacher.
Correct.
And so even though you might not have a study hall, you might have some more opportunity to work with the teacher.
Correct.
All right, let's keep going, Josh.
Okay. And then our other big change that we'll be undertaking, I talked about we can't cohort up here with a student and 25 other students. What we can and what we'll strive to do is cohort based on grade levels to the greatest extent possible. So we're going to try and keep freshmen with freshmen, sophomores with sophomores, juniors with juniors to the greatest extent possible. The way we'll do that largely is to physically restructure our space. And if you walk the high school right now, you'll know we have a math department, an English department, a social studies department. We're going to restructure that to be like a middle school house system would be, where you'll have a 9th grade department, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And for our younger grades, we can promise that a majority of their classes outside of electives will be in that pod. It changes, and you know that kids diversify the offerings that they select as they get into their junior and senior year. But on a conservative basis, we think that at least 60% of crossover between pods would be mitigated by restructuring. For our younger grades, that increases somewhere between 70 and 80% based on the courses our students were taking last year, which we believe is enough of a change and enough of an impact that we would restructure the building and have some teachers move groups.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
To Cassie, special education, the principals, thank you very much. Again, this is the executive summary. So you can imagine the legwork and the planning that went into it.
Like we mentioned, we will be starting the communication out to the broader staff. Remember, these were design teams. Now it's going to go out to all staff within the buildings, and then we'll start communicating out to families. We will structure the mask communication this last week of July, and then also as we get closer to school. So it won't be the first communication out, and then we'll continue to put that forward. I did want Mr. Smith to come forward because obviously there are questions about WIA, extracurricular, that we wanted to make sure you were aware of what's in place, what's still undecided, and also some things that we understand that with regards to crowd participation, concession stands, that may not be available in the fall.
Yeah, like Rick alluded to earlier, things are going to look a little bit different. WIA are our governing body for athletics. Unlike spring, where they came out and canceled all seasons, they're saying in the fall here they're going to support any schools that wish to continue and do that. And there's some different ideas going around with different conferences. You saw Wanakee this week, they came out and said they're not going to play their non-conference football games. They're not going to start football until August 17th. In my opinion, you're going to see some districts looking at some different options like that. In the southern part of the state, they're looking at rearranging some of the seasons that they sponsor. That would take WIAA to actually look and make some decisions then, because that would have to be a state-based decision. And the timelines and the cooperation, there would be a lot of moving parts. So there's a good chance here in the next few weeks you're going to hear a lot of different ideas, whether they're fact, whether they're fiction, probably a little bit in between. But as of right now, in terms of concrete decisions, there hasn't been anything made. As Dr. Spikuza alluded to, it's a local control decision. WIAA is not going to come down at this time and say, here's what's going to happen or here's what needs to happen. So we'll be working hand in hand with the state and with Pierce County directly about what it looks like here for the Prescott School District. We've been doing that. We've been collaborating along with our coaches with what the plans look like. And safety and health is always our #1 priority. We understand it's important to have kids involved with the social and emotional well-being. University of Wisconsin came out with a study recently that they did, and just kind of the benefits of being involved with activities and the well-being and overall impact that that has. So that will be kept in mind, obviously, but safety and health will be the #1 priority. For the summer here, we've been working closely with Pierce County about what are some things that we can do, and as we alluded to before, we are at high risk. So that limits us to drills and workouts only for school-approved activities. We've had speed and strength up here at the high school running for the last week and a half. That's been going fantastic. There's a lot of different protocols involved with that, with the guidelines for screening, temperature taking, the coaches and supervisors wearing masks. And now we've had our boys basketball and dance teams have gone the last couple nights with some social distancing and doing some workouts and drills here, following protocols with the coaches in there. Track had a camp last week that they followed through. Everything was successful with that. So there are some things going on for some opportunities, which is great to see the kids having those opportunities. But we're looking at being optimistic and realistic in a very fluid situation with what will come out here, with that flexibility and being focused on safety there. Like I said before, we're going to be meeting a lot. The Middle Border Conference ADs, we have a meeting next week scheduled to kind of look at what some of our options are and discuss what potentially could come out. Other conferences, like we said, are looking at their options and exploring. Where it gets interesting is our conference alone covers 3 different counties: St. Croix County, Polk County, and Pierce, obviously. So to have everything lined up there, it's going to be interesting what that looks like. And so that's what we're going to look at. Some conferences are looking at playing conference-only schedules here in the fall, if that potentially could work, and not playing their non-conference to try to eliminate, so say like volleyball, not having large 8-team invitationals or tournaments, and maybe playing a double round-robin conference tournament with just matches. Concessions, spectators, that's going to look different. That's one thing that you can almost guarantee, just to help eliminate as much risk as possible if we're able to, move forward with different avenues of athletics, but to also keep safety and what we can do in the forefront with that. So there's a good chance concessions will not happen here in the fall. Spectating may be limited. If you remember our boys basketball sectional game at Somerset last March, before we had to shut down, We had 88 spectators is what we were allowed. My guess is you're going to see something similar to that with that capacity there for safety. Like I said, we're being optimistic that things will go on here. Nothing has been canceled, but also very fluid with the situation here of what could potentially happen. I think that's important to be honest with that. Nothing has been canceled. It's a day-by-day situation. We're going to meet here and look at the things as we go. The time frame gets a little tight here. High school football is set to start August 3rd. So as we get going into that, like I said, it's things could get moving quickly in terms of that with the decision-making that goes on with health and safety as the #1 priority. Looking at the other fall activities, band and choir, theater productions, it's just not going to be feasible, to put on productions here as a live audience here, packing the auditorium here in the fall. That's just, as we look at the plans for schools and return to learn and whatnot, that's just not something that we feel confident in doing, indoor arenas with that going on. So as we go, we'll keep everyone abreast with information and in the loop here, and some decisions will be, have to be made here shortly, involving the county and whatnot and what it looks like for us. Like I said, being optimistic, being realistic, and keeping safety of everyone involved as a #1 forefront priority there.
Any questions for Matt? Really quick, Matt, as far as like events, like I'll call it football, who has the final authority to cancel the football game? Is it the public health department that makes that call, or how does that work? Is it the WIA or is it the school district?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the circumstances. What, public health has the right to limit crowds, the amount of people in a specific space. The actual activity, that might, Cassie, probably would be more of a WIA or school decision, like that competition. There would be maybe some guidance from public health. I don't think they can stop the competition, but I'm not positive on that.
I don't think so, but she really goes by that WIA, and that's pretty well done.
So it's really about the amount of people that can congregate in any one location.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll be a collaborative decision, and you might see some school districts that say, hey, we're on your schedule, but we just don't feel comfortable right now for everyone's safety of doing this. So I think it's going to be I don't say shared decision. There might be, you look at some counties that they're not at high risk, they might be more open to doing things, whereas the counties that are not, that's a little different situation there. So, our hope is to have some offerings and look at what we can do and, lay it out there. And it could change and go, and then based on, knock on wood, if, there were some spikes with cases, maybe you have to hit pause and then, seek further direction from the state or from the WIA with what they're going to look to do. WIA has been big right now with local control. Like I said, spring they came in and they shut down the entire operation. In the fall, as of right now, they've been saying it's going to be a local decision based on county, based on each district. Could that change? It could, but as of right now, that's what we're going with, looking at that.
And the challenge right now would be our non-conference games, because
Yep.
I believe it's Durand and Spooner.
We would head up to, so like for football, for example, like Mr. Matson brought up, we would head to Spooner for our first non-conference game. I talked to their head coach on the phone today, and he's in the same thought process that we are. It's still on the schedule. A lot of things that have to line up to make it possible. If you look at the guidelines right now, with us being at high risk, all we can do is workouts and drills. So for our football camp that we're looking to get approved, we can't throw a football to each other. We can't line up 11 on 11. So you look at it from the acclimatization standpoint of just the safety factors that go in a sport like football with the tackling and doing those things and coming together as a team. If we're not able to do those things until, say, the week of August 17th, we have to honestly ask ourselves, are we putting everyone in a safe situation just from the physical aspect of a sport like football to line up and go if we haven't had proper opportunities to practice as we need to, I guess you could say. So those would be factors that I think we have to look at in terms of, how we can move forward. We got to be fluid, we got to be positive, we got to look at what honestly we can do. And there could be a situation where, like Dr. Pascusa brought up, the south part of the state, they're throwing out options on what could happen if we get in a situation that's not looking like we can put on a season here in the fall. And some of the things that they've thrown out, nothing's concrete, it's ideas, there's not a bad idea, it's indifferent. Of looking at winter sports going on as scheduled for the WIA, and they might start a little bit later depending on the situation throughout the state, and then playing all scheduled fall sports, your volleyballs, your cross country, your basketball, your football, and doing those then during the spring seasons, from like a mid-March to end of May, and what that would look like, there's still a lot up in the air. And then looking at, in the summer months, then your spring seasons, your track, your boys golf, girls golf would be another fall sport, your boys golf, your softball, your baseball, and playing those in a summer season. A lot of moving parts, and I think a lot of different people are looking at best possible scenarios to give opportunities out there as they understand the social and mental aspect of the health there too. So, nothing concrete, but come here in the next few weeks though, I think we're gonna have to start having some more answers as, like we said, August 3rd is, the start of the official high school season there.
All right, thanks, Matt.
And it obviously puts all of us in a tough situation, because when it's that fluid, the superintendents with the WIA on Monday, I think we kind of said, we need a formal decision, because we need to be able to communicate out, and we need to be able to make sure that athletes aren't put in an unfair situation where they're asked to compete but haven't had the proper time to.
And different rules for different counties.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really hard to manage when you're playing sports.
So I think the main thing as a board is you hear people asking, you probably don't want to try to tell the story that we just told tonight, because it's really complex. But I think understanding that sometimes we like when somebody has the mandate statewide, and then conversely, when you say local control, then you do have kind of a quagmire with a bunch of 1,000 pieces trying to be put together. So my hat's off to all the ADs trying to navigate this, both with the state, the different counties, and WIA.
Thank you.
All right.
I have three real quick points. I don't need answers for any of this, and not directed at you, Matt, sorry. One is policing of masks. I'm kind of curious how that's going to happen in the schools. Kids not wearing them correctly, or kids just saying, I'm not going to wear them. Second thing is kind of like the lunch at high school. How do you eat with a mask on? How close are kids going to be? Just some details I was kind of curious about. And the last thing is, I'm not advocating for more meetings. I'm with Pat on that. But when we started doing work sessions, part of that point was to get some of this stuff dealt with during that, so we can come into a business meeting, do business, and go home. And not just for us, but everyone else in the viewing audience, online, whatever the case may be. This is a little bit different circumstance, obviously, because this is just so much at one time and things being jammed together, but I just wanted to keep that in the back of our minds as we move forward through the rest of our lives.
And I'll add too, I looked up the lunch policy, guys, and I was wrong. It is that students have to be sitting with their food for 15 minutes at least, so I just want to clarify.
Well, it saved me one follow-up, so thank you.
There you go.
All right. I want to kind of just direct your attention to, obviously, it's not likely if we're going to have to do off-campus learning. We know that some families, for either by choice or because of family circumstances, won't be able to have their child on campus. We are committed as a district, as every single building through special education and our general ed, to make sure that we continue to provide off-campus and distance learning. We know that we have a short window, but an important window in September to take advantage of having students in-house and to be able to re-engage with them and hope that we can elevate our game and also work with students about what is it like to learn online and how to stay engaged. So our goal is that we would have more than 24 hours before we have to tell everybody we're going to, off-campus learning. So that is part of our plan and part of the days that historically we've used for back-to-school time. The professional development and dedication will be site-based and working with technology and planning for off-campus. Obviously, based on cohort models, if 20% of the students don't come back, the elementary teachers and intermediate will discuss whether or not they want to assign a teacher to cover that class and have the other 3 on site. Again, that's going to be site-driven, teacher input, and professional principal-led. All of the buildings did do surveys, both with staff and also students. We have a lot of feedback. We know that we want to always monitor and adjust, and so there are some changes that we'll be putting in place. Some of it had to do with it's really hard to try to replicate 6 hours of school online, especially if your parents are working, doing Zoom meetings, and you have other siblings. And so you get bandwidth issues, much less, I think, Steve, you pointed out, is that some individuals within our community don't have broadband. The only way we were able to do a survey is online. We have a sampling problem. 90% of all families responded that they had the technology and wherewithal to engage in online learning. But that means that they had to have access in online learning. So this fall, we are going to do a paper survey to make sure that and identify anybody that's having challenges there. We have invested through our technology department and some of the additional dollars that are coming through CARES to purchase T-Mobile hotspots. Those will be through the library, and we'll be checking those out for students, whether or not it's because they're ill, whether or not they're isolated, or just for being able to do homework and things like that. The benefit of a hotspot might be a family that just doesn't have typical access. We are covering that service. We have it in place for 12 months. The one downside is you still have to have a mobile signal. If you're in a location in our city or district that doesn't have a good mobile system, then the hotspot won't be effective. I am participating with a number of Western Wisconsin superintendents. Our tech department and myself submitted an editorial that went into the Pierce County Journal last week about some of the 5 broadband bills that Senator Smith has put forward. Our Governor Evers has allocated some additional dollars. That's not going to move the needle quickly, but at least there is a lot of talk and some financial dollars that are coming out to the rural areas to increase the broadband. I see that as an equity issue. I think it's an equity issue not just for our students, but it's also for engaging in workforce and the economy of individuals on the western side of Wisconsin. We have also invested for our teachers to be able to create video lessons and potentially provide synchronous learning. So that would mean that as a teacher is currently teaching 15 students, if 5 are at home, they would be able to access that. We've worked with them. We're right now targeting that for our middle school and high school. I want to thank Mr. Igo and Mr. Figge and Mr. Flaherty for putting that together. And we'll be working on putting that forward with our teachers in the August. We have also made a commitment. I had Mr. Flaherty put together a quick scenario for all of us to kind of look at. As you know, we currently have Chromebooks where students can check them out based on the amount of, one of the recommendations from CDC is that all of the keyboards, if they're shared, they have to be wiped down. Based on the number of Chromebooks and the number of times we'd have to wipe them down, the cost per year is nearly $30,000 just to added value of just keeping them clean so that they're not passing on the contagion. In order for us to potentially provide every student at the high school their own Chromebook. So when they're here on site or if they have to go home, it's about $33,000. To me, at this point, we haven't built the budget. That's something that Renee and I will start to look at, but we are leaning towards, I would rather invest in giving every student a device than spending on Clorox wipes. And so we will be kind of looking to see if we have the funding for that and make that available at the high school level. The benefit for us in that model would be that it would allow us then to shift some of the current carts down to the middle school, so there'd be a cascading effect of getting additional devices throughout our system. We also are expanding 3 additional access points on our Wi-Fi system to get out to the parking lots. So currently, there are websites that you can look at for Wi-Fi access points. Currently, in Pierce County, there are only 2 additional public access points, and those are at our public libraries, and our public libraries were shuttered like we were. So we are looking at being able to pump our Wi-Fi out in designated spots so that if families wanted to, they would be able to access that. Not a great ideal situation, but we did think that it was something that was feasible and might be helpful. You heard some of the things that the learning that we provided was that our Infinite Campus, our grade books, Google Classroom, sometimes that was less than efficient for the different devices that we have. We've invested in a tool that will integrate our student information system with Google Classroom. It's going to reduce both our tech background and also some of the work of our teachers, and also integrate the grade book. So it's a technology solution that will allow our teachers less time and hopefully a better integrated system for our families. And then lastly, one of the software that the elementary school was using was Class Dojo. One of the challenges that it required is that students were using their parents' email, which if the parent wasn't around, or obviously there's commingling of emails on that. There is the program that Principal Dusick mentioned called Seesaw. We've invested in that. We're going to start the professional development and move in that direction for August. So what I wanted to kind of just end with is just kind of our shared understandings and kind of next steps. Thank you for your attention to all this, and just kind of give you an opportunity if there's any follow-up or clarification you need from us before we start our communication plan. So the third bullet is about moving forward with our communication plan. Is there any clarification or questions that you have that you think would be beneficial before we move forward?
Steve, you got any questions?
Well, you got my last ones.
Yeah. Pat?
No.
Tanya?
I would just make sure with the communication plan that I foresee mass as being a big question that's going to come back from a lot of people. So just being really clear why that's being required in some situations, and that emphasis on the science behind it.
And just to kind of what's our protocol, it'll probably shift across time. But Cassie is going to work with each school. We are looking at, our goal is to be educators. So part of it is, rather than punitive, it's about education. So it'll be about understanding kind of what we do currently about proper hygiene. We will have classes and discussions about appropriate use of a mask, how to put them on, how to clean them. We did invest and are getting 2,500 additional masks that will be on site so that we can provide them at any time for a student that does not have one, or for students that can't afford to have them provided. We mentioned kind of the communication plan. Coming out of tonight, we are going to meet as an administrative team. We're working with Andrea Herzon to kind of make sure that our executive summaries look similar. The one thing we did better was that we had a similar format for the mass. We want to make sure that when we communicate out to the families that they're seeing very similar things, mainly because they will have sometimes children in multiple buildings. We are going to obviously talk about an educational perspective about appropriate hygiene, hand washing, and the 6 pillars that Cassie mentioned. Depending on the age, that'll be repetitive in the early parts of September. We will define what cohort models mean and kind of the significance of that. As you know, it follows kind of a K-8 grade levels. Masks, as we mentioned, are highly recommended. It'll be required by site and age on a sliding basis. And then lastly, I just wanted to share that what we can control, or attempt to control, are the things that happen within the 8 hours that we're with the students and transporting them. And so we're asking our community and parents to kind of understand the unified and shared importance, the greater follow-through and commitment on these procedures are going to allow us to keep our students, staff, and families, and obviously the greater community healthy, and also allow us to stay open. And I think that's our primary goal, is to try to sustain as long as we can until a vaccine is available and allow us to kind of shift yet again. So thank you for allowing us to kind of go through this information. We obviously know where we have to kind of refine it, and know that starting next week and every week, expect as a community and families that you'll be receiving information on a weekly basis.
All right, thanks, Rick. Recognition of visitors. Anybody in the audience here that is a visitor? I don't believe
Don's
so.
left.
Oh, we got one. Anybody care to be recognized?
You're the sole survivor.
There we
Oh,
go.
man.